Russian groups like Wizard Spiders are sharing stolen information.
It means that more attacks are likely only a matter of time.
In June 2023, a cybersecurity researcher's monitor was flickering with an unusual discovery. There, in the researcher's malware analysis lab, lay something that would cause them to shriek. It was a new Linux variant of the infamous FASTCash malware. Let me tell you why this discovery was so significant. You see, FASTCash isn't your typical criminal tool. It's a sophisticated weapon in North Korea's cyber arsenal. Previously, this malware only targeted Windows and IBM AIX systems. But this new variant? It had evolved. I want you to understand this properly. What were hackers actually targeting with this new virus variant? When the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency first warned about FASTCash in December 2018, they attributed it to a state-sponsored North Korean group known as Hidden Cobra. This wasn't just some independent hackers working from their basements. This was a coordinated, state-level cyber operation with significant resources and expertise. Let me take you deeper into how this financial weapon actually works. The Linux variant of FASTCash might have slightly reduced functionality compared to its Windows cousin, but what it can do is quite simply mind-blowing. Imagine you're at an ATM trying to withdraw money from an empty account. Normally, the system would say insufficient funds and deny your transaction, right? But FASTCash literally intercepts that message and changes it to approved. It's like having an invisible person standing between you and the bank, changing your bank statements in real time. Here's how they pull it off. The malware is built as what we call a shared library. Think of it like a parasite that attaches itself to legitimate banking processes. But here's where it gets technical. It uses something called API hooking. In simple terms, you know how when you're at a restaurant, the waiter takes your order to the kitchen? API hooking is like having someone intercept that waiter, change your order without anyone knowing, and then let it continue to the kitchen. In this case, the malware is intercepting and manipulating the ISO 8583 messages, that standard language I was talking about that banks use to talk about money. The sophistication of this system is incredible. For example, if someone tried to withdraw a large quantity of cash, the malware springs into action. It looks for specific codes in the transaction. DE3 processing codes, 51 or 48, which indicate insufficient funds or balance checks. Don't worry, I'll explain. When it spots these insufficient funds or balance check codes, it modifies multiple parts of the message. The approval code, DE38, the action code, DE39, and additional amounts, DE54. But here's what's really wild. They're not just changing random numbers. The malware maintains an encrypted list of specific card numbers in a hidden file, shown on screen. It's like having a VIP list for fraud. If your card number is on that list, the transaction gets the special treatment, instant approval, regardless of your actual balance. You might be wondering why they don't just approve every transaction. That's because they're playing a long game. By being selective and careful about which transactions they manipulate, they can operate undetected for longer periods. It's like a professional card counter in a casino. The key isn't winning every hand. It's staying under the radar while consistently beating the house. What I'm about to tell you is perhaps one of the most sophisticated cyber heists ever orchestrated. In 2017, ATMs across 30 different countries suddenly started spitting out cash simultaneously. This wasn't some glitch. This was the Beagle Boys in action. Think of a bank's network like an office building. Most cybersecurity focuses on the front door, the firewall, the main entrance. But the Beagle Boys, they're not just breaking in through one door. They're compromising the entire security system, including the cameras, the guard posts, and even the building's blueprints. The first stage of their attack uses something called eccentric bandwagon. It's malware that acts like an invisible security camera, recording everything happening on infected computers. Every keystroke, every screen, every move. But don't get ahead of yourself just yet, because this is only the first tool, their reconnaissance tool. Once they're inside, they do something that security folks call lateral movement. Imagine a burglar who doesn't just break into one room, but carefully makes copies of every key they find, gradually gaining access to the entire building. The Beagle Boys move through bank networks this way, quietly collecting passwords and access credentials until they reach their real targets, the SWIFT terminals and payment switches. Now, you might be wondering what SWIFT is. It's basically the internal system of international banking, the network that all banks use to send money around the world. When you compromise SWIFT, you're not just hitting one bank, you're potentially accessing the entire global financial system. But the Beagle Boys aren't working alone. They're contracting with other hacking groups like TA505, a prolific, financially motivated cybercrime group active since 2014 and a significant player in the global cybercrime scene. They're working with them for their expertise in initial access. Think of it like having someone go and unlock all the doors for you before your heist. That's an initial access broker. And that's essentially how they're helping the Beagle Boys. This collaboration makes their attacks incredibly hard to defend against. The scariest part? Once they're in, they don't rush. They take their time, sometimes maintaining access for months before launching their attacks. They plant their FASTCash malware on payment switch application servers and wait for the perfect moment. When they finally strike, it's coordinated across multiple countries, multiple banks, multiple ATMs, all at once. Think about the level of coordination this requires. You need teams of people in dozens of countries, all synchronized, to withdraw cash at exactly the right moment. You need technical experts maintaining control of the compromised systems. You need money mules ready to collect and move the cash. This isn't just hacking. This is a full-blown military-grade operation. The persistence of these attackers is what truly sets them apart. Even after they're discovered, they don't just pack up and leave. They maintain multiple backdoors, multiple access points. They're always one step ahead, always with another way in. And remember, this isn't just about the money. Every successful attack provides them with more information, more access, more understanding of global banking systems. They're not just stealing cash. They're known for gathering intelligence and improving their techniques with each operation. So, who are these guys really? Well, we're talking about an army of hackers. They are super sophisticated and have generated an estimated $2 billion through digital bank robberies. That's a billion, with a B. The scale of this operation is unlike anything we've seen before. You know how most criminal groups specialize in one type of attack? These guys don't play that way. Imagine a special forces team that's equally skilled at stealth operations, frontal assaults, and psychological warfare. That's what we're dealing with here. The group behind these attacks goes by many names: Hidden Cobra, Beagle Boys, Lazarus Group. But they all lead back to one place: North Korea's Reconnaissance General Bureau, their military intelligence agency. This isn't some basement operation. This is legitimately North Korea. It's Kim Jong-un's army. They are elite hackers with virtually unlimited resources and protection. What makes them truly dangerous is their diversity of attack methods. Would you believe me if I told you that they're not just hitting banks? Their arsenal includes everything from sophisticated ransomware like WannaCry, Yep, that virus that locked up computers worldwide in 2017. They also target large cryptocurrency wallets and the funds behind the top crypto exchanges. They've mastered what we call multi-vector attacks, striking from multiple angles simultaneously. Think about this for a second. When you're defending a castle, you typically focus on the main gate, right? Well, these guys are simultaneously tunneling under the walls, scaling the towers, ramming the front door, and having secret undercover agents on the inside unlock doors from within. That's what makes defending against them so challenging. I'm not joking about having secret undercover agents on the inside, by the way. These guys are so ruthless that from their computers in North Korea, they're applying for jobs in America and other Western countries, and successfully getting hired. If you think that's a joke, then think again. I'll put a link here to another video where we cover exactly that. The technical infrastructure behind their operations is also magnificent. They maintain hundreds, if not thousands, of networks of compromised servers across multiple countries, making it nearly impossible to trace attacks back to their source. They are playing a dangerous game of hide and seek, and they're winning. Remember those hundreds of millions of dollars they've stolen? That money isn't funding luxury yachts or mansions. It's being channeled back into developing even more sophisticated cyber capabilities. Each successful attack makes them stronger, more advanced, more dangerous. What's crazy is what I'm telling you is just what the world knows about. Now that you know exactly who these guys are, then let me tell you about what was probably the biggest bank heist in history. Well, almost. The Bangladesh bank hack. It wasn't just another cyber attack. It was the moment when the Beagle Boys nearly pulled off a billion-dollar theft. When you withdraw money from an ATM, you're triggering a chain of events involving multiple banks, security systems, and verification protocols. But these guys compromised the whole system. They attempted to transfer $1 billion, but the Federal Reserve Bank of New York luckily managed to stop most of the transfers. It wasn't without some success, though, because by the time they stopped it, $81 million had already vanished into North Korea's wallet. But here's the thing. This wasn't even their most technically impressive attack. In 2017, these guys pulled off something that should have been impossible. Imagine coordinating a bank robbery not in one city, not in one country, but in 30 countries simultaneously. They compromised ATM networks across the globe, making machines spit out cash at exactly the same time. Each ATM was programmed to dispense between 12,000 and 30,000 Turkish lira per transaction. Not enough to raise immediate alarms, but multiply that by hundreds of ATMs across 30 countries, and you're looking at a massive payday. Then, they did it again, with an attack on Bank Islami in Pakistan. In October 2018, they managed to steal $6.1 million through their FASTCash scheme. Every transaction they made looked legitimate because, technically speaking, it is. The system is processing everything normally. It's just being told to approve withdrawals it shouldn't. After so long of these guys causing chaos for banking systems around the globe, the United States Department of Justice dropped a bombshell when they announced charges against 3 North Korean hackers for stealing $1.3 billion. The investigation into these attacks brought together some of the heaviest hitters in global cybersecurity. We're talking about CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the Department of the Treasury, and other international law enforcement agencies. When cybersecurity researchers started picking apart the malware samples they'd found in the wild, they realized it had to be North Korea. The US won't reveal how they really identified the hackers behind it, but they dropped names: John Chang-hyuk, Kim Il, and Park Jin-hyuk. These were military-trained cyber operators working for a hostile state. Sadly, these guys are still at large, and don't count on them being arrested anytime soon. They likely reside in North Korea, and I'm willing to put a bet down on this. They will never be caught. The United Nations panel of experts has identified this as more than just cybercrime. This is a deliberate evasion of international sanctions, a way for North Korea to generate substantial revenue for their weapons of mass destruction, despite global restrictions. This is North Korea's sole profitable enterprise at work. The next time you use an ATM or make a credit card purchase, remember, you're interacting with a system that might just be infected with some of the most sophisticated malware the world has ever seen. And that is FASTCash. 2013 marked the emergence of a threat actor that would become one of the most persistent yet unknown hunters. Known as BitterAPT, this group materialized seemingly from nowhere, but their impact would soon be felt across 2 continents. Now, while we can track BitterAPT's movements across Asia and Europe, their true identity remains shrouded in mystery. All evidence points to South Asian origins, but in the world of cyber-espionage, nothing is quite what it seems. All we know for certain is that this is no ordinary hacking group. I've studied countless APT groups over the years, but Bitter stands out for one crucial reason. They've maintained their operational tempo for over a decade while continuously evolving their tactics. In cybersecurity, that kind of persistence isn't just impressive. It's a sign of a hacking group that has lots of money, lots of knowledge, and lots of time. If you don't know what I'm hinting at, well, these guys are probably military. When we talk about an APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat, we're not dealing with your average cyber criminals. These are sophisticated operators with patience, resources, and most importantly, a strategic objective. They don't just breach systems for quick profit. They embed themselves deep within networks, sometimes maintaining access for years. So, in 2021, BitterAPT launched one of their biggest operations yet, a campaign targeting Chinese military installations. The following information comes directly from my sources at a Chinese antivirus research lab. The attack began with something as innocent as a conference invitation, landing in military officers' inboxes. But what happened next was anything but innocent. The attackers didn't just spam random emails. They crafted detailed conference agendas, perfectly tailored to their targets' interests. These weren't your typical Nigerian prince scams. These were meticulously researched, professionally formatted invitations that could fool even seasoned military personnel. Inside these emails was a seemingly harmless attachment, a CHM file. Now, let me pause here for a moment. CHM files are Microsoft's compiled HTML format, typically used for help documentation. But in the hands of BitterAPT, they became weapons. When opened, these files unleashed what the group called Defender Service, a name chosen specifically to blend in with legitimate Windows processes. The initial infection was just the beginning. Every 15 minutes, like clockwork, the malware would phone home to its controllers. Think of it as a digital heartbeat, confirming the infection was still active. But what made this operation particularly nasty was the arsenal of plugins they deployed. Let me give you the full picture of what they installed on these systems. A remote control tool that gave them complete access to infected machines. A file theft module that could silently extract sensitive documents. A browser credential stealer to harvest passwords. And my personal favorite, for its ingenuity, a keyboard logger that specifically monitored for clipboard activity. Every time someone hit Ctrl+V to paste sensitive information, the malware was watching. Each piece of stolen data was encrypted using a simple but effective method, adding a specific value to each byte of the file. Simple enough to be quick, complex enough to avoid immediate detection. BitterAPT just demonstrated that they were able to establish persistent access to some of China's most sensitive military networks. Now that's something you don't hear about every day. Think about it. In one smooth operation, they managed to breach military security, establish persistent access, and create a comprehensive surveillance system. And this was just the beginning of what would become an even more ambitious series of attacks. While their previous operations focused on traditional computer systems, what they did next showed just how adaptable they'd become. Sometime by early 2022, they launched a campaign that would target not just computers, but every device their victims owned. When a threat actor expands to multiple platforms, it's like they're no longer trying to pick your front door lock. They're trying to break in through every window, door, and crack. Their social engineering tactics were particularly fascinating. Instead of brute force attacks, they created an entire cast of fictional characters. Attractive young women, passionate journalists, dedicated activists, each crafted to build trust with specific targets. These weren't random catfish attempts. These were carefully constructed personas designed to appeal to their victims' specific interests and vulnerabilities. They leveraged Apple's Test Flight service, a legitimate platform for testing iOS apps, to distribute malware to iPhones. Think about that for a second. They weren't just using shady websites. They were exploiting official channels that users trust. For Android users, they deployed something even more sophisticated, a custom malware package called Dracarys. And let me tell you about its capabilities, because this is where things get truly disturbing. Once installed, Dracaris could access your call logs and text messages, track your exact location, capture photos using your camera, listen through your microphone, install additional malicious apps, steal all your contacts and files. Their distribution methods were equally clever. They'd post what looked like broken links or images, but these were actually carefully crafted malicious payloads. They used link-shortening services and compromised legitimate websites to mask their tracks. Despite being described by security researchers as having relatively low sophistication, they were persistent and well-resourced enough to execute complex, multi-platform attacks across multiple countries. That's right. They attacked victims in New Zealand, India, Pakistan, and the United Kingdom, using different attack vectors for different devices, all while maintaining convincing cover stories and social engineering tactics. And they did it simultaneously. But what we've covered so far was just their warm-up act. What they did next would take their operations to an entirely new level. In 2022, BitterAPT went back to targeting the military. They went for Bangladesh's elite police unit, the Rapid Action Battalion. This wasn't just any police force. This was Bangladesh's premier anti-terrorism unit. The fact that they were targeted tells us something truly sinister about BitterAPT's ambitions. By 2022, their operations had spread westward, breaching organizations in Turkey and reaching as far as the United Kingdom. They even extended their reach to New Zealand, demonstrating a global ambition that few threat actors possess. What makes them particularly interesting is their arsenal, including their custom malware family called BitterAPT, a sophisticated tool we'll discuss in detail later. The attack began with spear phishing emails sent directly to high-ranking RAB officers. But here's where it gets interesting. When the officers opened what looked like routine documents, they unknowingly triggered something called the equation editor exploit. Let me explain it. The equation editor is a component of Microsoft Office that most people don't even know exists. But BitterAPT knew about 3 specific vulnerabilities in this tool: CVE 2017-11882, CVE 2018-0798, and CVE 2018-0802. They chain these vulnerabilities together in a way that would make most hackers take notice. What happened next is particularly clever. The exploit launched what appeared to be a Windows security update service. But in reality, it was deploying their custom-made ZXXZ Trojan. Let me pause here, because this is where things get really interesting. The ZXXZ Trojan isn't your average malware. It's a 32-bit Windows executable that uses something called exclusive or operations for encrypting its communications. Think of it as speaking in code, but with mathematics. But what makes this Trojan truly sophisticated is how it phones home to its controllers. Instead of connecting directly to some suspicious server in a shady part of the internet, it connected to a domain specifically chosen to look like legitimate tech support, shown on screen. But this domain actually pointed to Amazon's AWS Global Accelerator service. They were literally hiding their criminal infrastructure behind one of the most trusted names in cloud computing. The timing of this attack raises some fascinating questions. Why did BitterAPT suddenly shift their focus from Chinese military targets to targets across social media platforms, then to Bangladesh's elite police unit? This kind of dramatic pivot in targeting usually indicates either a change in mission or, more intriguingly, a deliberate attempt to obscure their true objectives. What makes this operation scary, in my own opinion, is how they gained access to an organization that itself conducts sensitive investigations. The implications of such access are, quite frankly, disturbing. Okay, prepare yourself, because what we've seen so far is nothing compared to what's next. In 2023, BitterAPT crossed the line. They targeted China's nuclear energy industry. This wasn't just another cyber attack. It was a war. This was an attempt to breach one of the most sensitive and heavily protected sectors of the world. They crafted emails that appeared to come from the Embassy of Kyrgyzstan in Beijing, inviting targets to a nuclear energy conference supposedly co-hosted by the International Atomic Energy Agency and the China Institute of International Studies. Think about the audacity, impersonating not just one, but 3 prestigious organizations simultaneously. BitterAPT deployed 2 separate infection chains, a classic case of not putting all your eggs in one basket. The first used CHM files, while the second exploited Excel vulnerabilities. But here's what makes this attack very, very strange. They used empty second-stage payloads. You see, most security systems are looking for malicious code. But when your payload is empty, there's nothing to detect. The CHM payload they used employed LZX compression, which not only made the file smaller, but also helped it slip past standard security scans. Even better for the attackers, it required minimal user interaction and didn't need Microsoft Office to work. In the world of cyber weapons, this is like having a key that works on any lock. Their command and control infrastructure was equally impressive. They set up multiple domains, which are shown on screen, each one carefully chosen to look like legitimate services. This wasn't random. This was calculated infrastructure masking at its finest. The fact that BitterAPT would even attempt such an operation truly says a lot about their capabilities and, more importantly, their ambitions. Think about the geopolitical chess game being played here. They're assumedly a South Asian threat actor, targeting Chinese nuclear facilities using Kyrgyzstani diplomatic cover. My question to you is, what happens when the next payload isn't empty? In 2024, BitterAPT was yet again seen attacking the military sector. They went after Turkey's defense sector. This wasn't just another cyber attack. This was the culmination of everything they'd learned over the past decade, wrapped into one devastatingly effective package. The attack began with a compressed RAR file attached to an email. They used something called alternate data streams, or ADS. ADS is like having a secret compartment inside a normal file. You can hide malicious code inside what appears to be a legitimate document, and most security tools won't even notice it's there. When the target opened what looked like a normal PDF, a PowerShell command silently executed in the background. But here's where BitterAPT showed their true expertise. They didn't just deploy one remote access Trojan, RAT. They deployed 2, WMRAT and MIA-RAT. These 2 rats are like fraternal twins, similar in purpose but completely different in execution. WMRAT uses a subtraction cipher with the value 0x25 to encrypt its communications, while MIA-RAT uses XOR encryption with 0x43 and, bizarrely enough, includes the string doobie-doo-doo-z's in its decryption routine. Both rats were written in C++, but they operate on different ports. WMRAT on 47,408 and MIA-RAT on 56,189. Every 17 minutes, like clockwork, a scheduled task called DS Service Cleanup would run, maintaining their presence in the system. This wasn't just persistence. This was methodical, calculated control. The sophisticated delivery mechanism, the dual RAT approach, the precise timing intervals. They're not just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. They're deploying a carefully orchestrated attack with multiple fallback options. The use of 2 different rats with different encryption methods isn't just redundancy, it's strategic thinking. If one rat gets detected, the other might still maintain access. If one encryption method gets cracked, the other keeps their communications secure. This is the work of an adversary that has learned from every previous operation, refined their techniques, and evolved into something far more dangerous than when they first emerged. After tracking BitterAPT for over a decade, one of the most fascinating patterns we've uncovered isn't in their malware or their targets, it's in their working hours. Across every campaign, their activities consistently fall within UTC plus 5.30 time zone working hours. Now, you might be thinking, so what? They work regular hours. But when you're running a global cyber espionage operation, you typically see activity around the clock. Yet, BitterAPT operates like they're punching a time clock. And that time zone happens to align perfectly with South Asia. These aren't just automated systems running on their own. Analysis shows consistent manual deployment of their malware. That means there are real human operators sitting at keyboards, manually executing these attacks. This isn't some set-and-forget operation. This is skilled tradecraft requiring direct human intervention. Their infrastructure setup is particularly fascinating. Look at how they've evolved, from basic command and control servers to a sophisticated network of staging and implant domains to handle their WMRAT and MIA-RAT command and control operations. Despite all we know about their patterns, despite being able to track their working hours and infrastructure, BitterAPT continues to successfully breach high-value targets. I've studied countless APT groups over the years, but Bitter stands out for one reason. They've managed to maintain their operation for over a decade. This is a truly remarkable hacker at work. So, who do you think is behind the BitterAPT operations? UTC plus 530 is the time used in India and Sri Lanka, but was formerly used in Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Whoever it is, don't expect them to be going away anytime soon. Consider subscribing if you want to know when they strike next. It's the year 2000, and while most of the world is celebrating the dot-com boom, Brazilian banks are fighting a silent war. I'm talking about a battlefield on the internet where millions of dollars are at stake, and the enemy is invisible. Let me take you inside this hostile environment. Brazilian banks were actually ahead of the curve. They had it all: security tokens, two-factor authentication, chip and PIN cards, the works. But none of it was enough. You want to know why? It starts with something deceptively simple. A piece of code that would change the face of banking malware forever. Let me show you what I mean. The first Brazilian banking Trojans used what we call a keylogger, built around a Windows function called getAsyncKeyState. This function does exactly what it sounds like. It checks the state of your keyboard keys. Here's where it gets interesting. The code runs in an infinite loop, checking every possible key on your keyboard, from key code 8 to 190. When it detects a key press, it logs it. That's it. That's all it took to start stealing banking credentials. Imagine that. While banks were implementing million-dollar security systems, criminals were succeeding with code that could fit on a Post-it note. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating. Brazil became a perfect storm of cybercrime innovation. The country lacked proper legislation for punishing cybercriminals, creating a low-risk, high-reward environment for digital theft. Banks were deploying increasingly sophisticated security measures. But they were essentially building higher walls while criminals were already inside the house. What started with these simple keyloggers would evolve into something far more sinister. But that's the thing about cybersecurity. Sometimes the simplest attacks are the most devastating. And in Brazil's case, this was exactly that. But it only got worse from here. You see, while the rest of the world was celebrating the new millennium, Brazilian cybercriminals were laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most sophisticated banking malware ecosystems on the planet. And trust me, what came next would make these early keyloggers look like child's play. Remember that simple keylogger I showed you? Well, what happened next is absolutely wild. Brazilian cybercriminals didn't just stick with basic keyboard monitoring. They evolved, and they evolved fast. By 2005, these guys were already pushing the boundaries with something called DDE, Dynamic Data Exchange. Instead of just logging keystrokes, they were now monitoring URLs in real time. Think about that. They could see exactly which banking websites you were visiting right as you visited them. This wasn't just recording keystrokes anymore, this was active surveillance. Around 2010, these criminals started implementing what we call anti-debugging techniques. Imagine trying to analyze a piece of malware, but the malware is actively fighting back, detecting when you're trying to study it. That's some futuristic sounding stuff right there. But trust me, it was real. They didn't stop there. The malware started using process hollowing, basically hijacking legitimate Windows processes and replacing their contents with malicious code. It's like a digital parasite hiding inside trusted system processes where antivirus software wouldn't think to look. Then came DLL hijacking. You know all those system files your computer needs to run programs? These guys figured out how to replace them with their own malicious versions. But here's the crazy part. They started using what we call living off the land binaries, or LOL bins. These are legitimate Windows tools that they repurposed for attacks. It's like using the operating system's own weapons against itself. By 2015, what started in Brazil had spread across Latin America and into Europe. Why? Because these cybercriminals realized something crucial. Many Brazilian banks also operated in these regions. They already had the playbook. They just needed to translate it. The sophistication of these attacks was unprecedented. We're talking about malware that could encrypt itself to avoid detection, check if it was being analyzed in a security lab, and use legitimate Windows tools to do its dirty work. This wasn't just evolution. This was a revolution in banking malware. These techniques laid the groundwork for something even more devastating that was coming. Something that would change the face of financial cybercrime forever. By 2015, something absolutely unreal emerged from Brazil's digital underworld. Kaspersky researchers identified 4 distinct malware families so sophisticated. They gave them a name that would send chills. The tetrade. The 4 malware families we're talking about were Guildma, Javali, Melcaz, and Grandorero. 4 separate but equally devastating pieces of malware. But here's what makes them special. Unlike the simple keyloggers we discussed earlier, these were modular. Think of it like this. Instead of one solid piece of malicious code, they could load different components as needed, making them incredibly adaptable and harder to detect. You know what's really mind-blowing? Let me show you something Guildma does. It uses what we call NTFS alternate data streams. Check this out. It can hide malicious code inside legitimate Windows files by attaching it like a secret companion file. Here's the actual command it uses. What looks like a harmless image file is actually carrying malicious code. And it's doing it right under your operating system's nose. But that's not even the clever part. These malware families use something called domain generation algorithms, or DGA. Every time they need to communicate with their command servers, they generate new random domain names automatically. This makes it nearly impossible for security teams to block their communications. By the time you've blocked one domain, they've already generated dozens more. And here's where it gets truly global. The tetrade. The 4 malware families weren't just content with just targeting Brazilian banks. These cyber criminals realized something brilliant. Many Brazilian banks also operated in other Latin American countries and Europe. It was like having the secret tool that worked on multiple locks. Why create new malware when you could use the same tools to target banks across continents? The backdoor capabilities these malware families developed were unmatched. They could sit silently on infected systems, waiting for instructions, downloading new modules, and adapting to new security measures. What started in Brazil had become a global threat, and as you'll soon see, the worst was yet to come. Just when security researchers thought they had seen it all, Astaroth emerged. And let me tell you, this was something entirely different. I've been studying malware for years, but when I first saw this campaign, even I was impressed by its ingenuity. Imagine you're in Brazil, and it's tax season. You receive an urgent email about your tax documents. Looks legitimate, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Inside that innocent-looking zip file is a Windows shortcut file. An LNK file that triggers one of the most sophisticated attack chains I've ever seen. Let me show you something that'll blow your mind. This is the actual code they used. This isn't just regular JavaScript, it's obfuscated, meaning it's deliberately written to be unreadable by security tools. But what makes it truly devious is how it uses a legitimate Windows utility to execute its malicious code. But once Astaroth gets into your system, like the previous malware, it uses process hollowing. The target list was massive. Manufacturing companies, retail firms, government agencies. No sector was safe. But what really sets Astaroth apart is what happened next. They started hiding their command and control information, the instructions telling the malware what to do, in encrypted messages on YouTube and Facebook posts. Think about that for a second. Every time you're scrolling through your feed, there could be malware communications happening right in front of you, hidden in plain sight. This wasn't just malware anymore. This was digital artistry of the darkest kind. The criminals behind Astaroth had taken everything we knew about banking Trojans and turned it on its head. They weren't just stealing banking credentials anymore. They were rewriting the rules of what malware could do. This is where the line between legitimate tools and malicious software would become increasingly blurred. In 2024, everything changed. I want you to understand just how significant this is. What I'm about to show you represents the perfect convergence of every sophisticated technique we've discussed, plus some new ones that left even veteran security researchers stunned. The campaign was called Pineapple, and it marked the first time we saw Brazilian cybercriminals working directly with Eastern European gangs. But here's what makes this truly fascinating. They weren't just sharing techniques. They were combining them in ways we'd never seen before. Let me show you something that demonstrates just how sophisticated this operation was. Pineapple wasn't just using regular servers. They were compromising Google Cloud instances and creating their own projects on legitimate cloud platforms. Look at these domains they used. This wasn't just another malware campaign. This was malware hiding behind Google's own infrastructure. Think about that. They were using one of the most trusted names in tech to deliver their attacks. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember those email security measures we talked about? Pineapple found a way to break them. They discovered that by manipulating something called the SMTP return path field and using specific mail forwarding services, they could make email security systems time out during their checks. It's like making a security guard fall asleep at exactly the right moment. The targets weren't just banks anymore. Manufacturing companies, retail businesses, government agencies. Pineapple was going after everyone. They were distributing advanced versions of both Grandorero and Astaroth Trojans, combining Brazilian innovation with Eastern European infrastructure. You know what makes this so significant? This isn't just about stealing money anymore. This is about the globalization of cybercrime. Brazilian criminals bringing their banking malware expertise, Eastern European gangs contributing their infrastructure and evasion techniques. It's like watching a dark version of international cooperation. This collaboration means we're not just dealing with isolated threat actors. anymore. We're facing an evolved threat landscape where criminal expertise flows freely across continents and where techniques are shared and improved upon. Let me show you something that most people never think about. When they check their email. Every time you receive a message, there's an invisible battle happening behind the scenes. It's called SPF, Sender Policy Framework. And it's supposed to be one of our strongest defenses against email fraud. The way it works is fascinating. Every email has something called a return path. Think of it as the email's true identity card. When your email server receives a message, it looks up this return path in what we call an SPF record, which is basically a list of approved IP addresses that are allowed to send mail for that domain. But here's where Pineapple showed their genius. They discovered that if you manipulate the return path just right, you can cause the security check to time out. It's like making the security guard take so long to verify your ID that they just wave you through out of frustration. Let me show you exactly what they did. They created custom return paths that looked legitimate. This aligned perfectly with the domain they were spoofing, making it look like a legitimate mail server configuration. But here's the clever part. They used mail forwarding services that don't properly handle failed SPF checks. This isn't just about bypassing email security anymore. What Pineapple demonstrated is that our entire system of trust in digital communications can be undermined. When they combined this with their cloud service abuse and international collaboration, they created something that traditional security measures simply weren't designed to handle. Think about what this means for global financial security. Banks and security companies are implementing sophisticated defense-in-depth strategies. But these attackers are finding ways to bypass multiple layers of security simultaneously. They're not just breaking through walls, they're walking right through the front door wearing a perfect disguise. Let me take you back to where we started. A simple keylogger in Brazil running in an infinite loop, checking for keystrokes. Now look at what we've become. In just over 2 decades, we've witnessed something unprecedented in the history of cybercrime. The complete evolution of an entire malware ecosystem. Here's what makes this story truly remarkable. In 2011, Brazilian cybercriminals started using something called malicious pack scripts at first. It seemed like just another local innovation. But then something interesting happened. Russian cybercriminals adopted the same technique for their banking Trojan capper. This wasn't just imitation. It was the beginning of a partnership that would change everything. Let me show you what modern Brazilian banking malware looks like now. This is part of Grandareiro's domain generation algorithm. The malware has code that will calculate the path to a Google Sites page containing information about the C2 server to be used by the malware. The algorithm uses a key, like the one shown above, that is specific to the user as well as the current date, which means that the URL will change daily. As we can see, this is used by the operator Zemad, whose identity remains unknown. This isn't just code. This is the result of years of collaboration between Brazilian and Eastern European cyber criminals. They're using what we call bulletproof hosting. Servers in Ukraine that are essentially immune to takedown requests. These servers generate new domain names automatically, making it nearly impossible to block their communication channels. This collaboration isn't just about sharing code or infrastructure. The Brazilian crews brought their expertise in banking malware and social engineering. The Eastern European groups contributed their knowledge of bulletproof hosting and fast flux networks. Together, they've created something far more dangerous than either could have achieved alone. Think about what this means for the future. Every new defense mechanism we develop has to account for not just one type of attack, but an entire ecosystem of hackers that are improving and uniting year on year. The simple keylogger that started in Brazil has evolved into a global network of sophisticated malware, backed by bulletproof infrastructure and powered by international criminal collaboration. this isn't the end of the story. The next evolution? Well, that's probably already happening right now. Somewhere in the dark corners of the internet. God knows what kind of mischief these hackers are up to, and what new techniques they're coming up with to infiltrate, hack, and steal their way to riches. Subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date with the ongoing battle against Brazilian banking Trojans. I'm serious when I say this is not the last time I'll report on it. If the future repeats itself, which it usually does, then the hackers behind it certainly aren't going anywhere. But luckily, I'll be here to let you know about it. You know what fascinates me? How the smallest innovations can create the biggest vulnerabilities. Let me tell you about CASIO, and trust me, this story is about to get wild. Japan, 1946. While most of the country was still rebuilding from the war, an engineer named Tadao Kashio was tinkering in his workshop. His first invention? The Yubiwa pipe. Literally a ring that holds your cigarette. Simple, mechanical, completely analog. Zero security concerns. But by 1974, CASIO dropped the CASIOtron, the world's first digital watch with an automatic calendar. Think about that leap. From a mechanical ring to programming calendar algorithms, CASIO's attack surface started growing. I've spent years analyzing system vulnerabilities, and this transformation, it's a security researcher's perfect case study. Every digital feature adds another potential entry point for attackers. By 1989, they released the F91W watch. Looks basic, right? But they were pumping out 3 million units annually, each one representing a piece of their expanding digital empire. Watches, calculators, cameras, keyboards, laptops, phones. Every new product line added layers of complexity to their security needs. Let me show you something on one of my monitors here. See all these old and new CASIO products? Each innovation added new code, new systems, new databases. Legacy systems started piling up. Old code never really dies. It just gets buried under new layers, creating hidden vulnerabilities that most people don't even know exist. What started as a simple mechanical workshop transformed into a global tech giant with attack surfaces spanning decades. And in cybersecurity, that's what we call a perfect storm. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next, because those legacy systems, they're about to become a serious problem. Early August 2023. While most of the world was enjoying their summer, a threat actor known as Thrax made an announcement on breach forums. That's where all the major data leaks get posted. The message was clear: 1.2 million user records, stolen from CASIO's legacy databases, were now exposed. Here's something to think about. You know how you might keep old documents in a filing cabinet thinking they're safe because they're old and forgotten? In the online world, that's exactly what we call a legacy database. Just because data is old doesn't mean it's worthless to attackers. In fact, sometimes it's quite the opposite. The breach centered on a remote desktop services server, which was hosting older CASIO databases. Let me break this down for you, because this is where it gets technical. You see that server over there? That's running RDS, Remote Desktop Services. It's like a gateway into your system. And if it's not configured properly, especially with legacy systems, well, you're basically leaving your front door wide open. In this case, that's exactly what happened with CASIO's legacy system. And, well, they exposed AWS keys. For those who aren't familiar with AWS keys, imagine them as master keys to a massive apartment complex. With these keys, attackers don't just get access to one room. They potentially get access to everything. When these keys are exposed, it's not just about what data was stolen, it's about what could be stolen next. The compromised database contained records dating back to July 2011. The threat actor Thrax didn't just quietly steal this data. They blasted their announcement on the notorious cybercrime forum, inviting anyone interested to take a look and potentially buy it. Think of cybercrime forums like digital black markets. When attackers post here, it's not just about selling the data, it's about establishing reputation and creating fear. It's a power play that says, look what we can do. What makes this breach particularly significant isn't just the number of records exposed, it's what it represents. This wasn't a sophisticated attack on cutting-edge systems. This was a breach of legacy infrastructure, systems that many organizations forget about or consider low risk. The crazy thing is, this breach was just the beginning. While everyone was focused on these 1.2 million records, something much bigger was brewing. But we'll get to that. Let me show you exactly what would follow this breach, because this is where it gets really interesting. Just 2 months after the legacy database leak, CASIO got hit again. This time, it wasn't their consumer products or corporate systems that were compromised. It was their educational platform, ClassPad.net. And let me tell you, as someone who spent years in dev environments, this one hurts to talk about. Let me explain something crucial about development environments. Think of them like the blueprint room in an architect's office. It's where you design and test everything before it goes live. But here's the catch. Even though it's just for development, it needs to be just as secure as your final product. Why? Because it often contains real data for testing. And more importantly, it can provide a backdoor into your production systems. The numbers in this breach are quite crazy. We're talking about 91,921 compromised records from Japanese customers alone, including 1,108 educational institutions. But that's not even the full picture. The attack reached across 148 countries beyond Japan, exposing an additional 35,049 records. That's over 127,000 individuals and institutions affected across 149 countries. But the really crazy part? This entire breach came down to one simple mistake. You know how your phone has security settings that you can toggle on and off? Well, enterprise systems have similar settings, but way more complex. In this case, someone in the department managing ClassPad's development environment had accidentally disabled critical network security settings. I've seen this exact scenario play out before. The development team probably disabled some security features to make testing easier. It's like, imagine you're working on your car in your garage. You might take off some safety features to access the engine better, but here's the critical part. You've got to put those safety features back on before you drive the car. The attackers got everything: names, emails, addresses, payment details, license codes. And remember, this is an educational platform. I'm talking about teachers, students, entire institutions having their data exposed because of a simple misconfiguration. You see, development environments often have privileged access to production systems. When you disable security settings in development, you're not just exposing test data, you're potentially creating a pathway for attackers to reach your live systems. The breach revealed a critical weakness in CASIO's operational management. Their official statement acknowledged insufficient operational management. Corporate lingo for, we didn't have proper controls in place to prevent this kind of mistake. Security isn't just about having the right tools. It's about having the right processes. You can have the most sophisticated security system in the world, but if someone can simply turn it off without proper oversight, it's like having a bank vault with the combination written on a sticky note next to it. The company had just learned the hard way that in our interconnected world, a single misconfiguration can have global consequences. And as if the immediate impact wasn't bad enough, this breach would later prove to be just another step in a series of escalating security failures that would ultimately lead to something far more devastating. But we'll get to that part of the story soon enough. Early 2024 brought winds of change to CASIO. And from where I stand, I can tell you, this wasn't just another corporate restructuring. This was about to become a masterclass in how human factors can create digital vulnerabilities. Listen, when most people think about cybersecurity, they picture firewalls, encryption, and sophisticated software. But let me tell you something that every experienced security professional knows. Your strongest security system is only as good as the people who maintain it. CASIO announced what they called an optimization, a massive restructuring that would see 610 employees leave the company, 530 workers in Japan, and 80 overseas. Now, imagine you're running a complex security system, and suddenly, the people who've been maintaining different parts of it start disappearing. Here's what makes this situation particularly dangerous from a security standpoint. In any large organization, there's something we call institutional knowledge. It's like a living map of how all the systems work together. When you lose 610 people, you're not just losing employees, you're losing pieces of that map. They suffered brutal financial consequences. 7 billion yen in losses related to severance payments and restructuring costs. But it's not just the financial costs they should have been worrying about. It's the security implications of rapid workforce changes. Think about it this way. Imagine you're running a massive library and suddenly half your librarians leave. They each knew where certain books were, how the cataloging system worked in their section, which shelves needed regular maintenance. Now multiply that complexity by 1,000 when you're talking about internet systems, databases, and security protocols. The thing is, during periods of major restructuring, organizations often face what we call security continuity gaps. These are dangerous periods where normal security protocols might be disrupted because the people who usually handle them are either leaving or shifting roles. You see these monitoring screens behind me? Each one shows different security metrics. But what the screen doesn't show you is what's keeping the system secure. In a large company, when you lose hundreds of experienced staff, you're not just losing employees, you're creating gaps in your security fabric. You might have the most sophisticated security system in the world. But if the people who know how to run it properly are walking out the door, you've got a problem. It's like having a top-of-the-line home security system, but nobody remembers the password or where all the sensors are placed. The timing couldn't have been more critical. Coming off 2 major security incidents in 2023, CASIO was already in a vulnerable position. Now, with hundreds of experienced employees departing, they were about to face an even greater challenge, maintaining security continuity while undergoing massive organizational change. Remember this, in cybersecurity, human factors aren't just important. They're often the difference between a secure system and a vulnerable one. When an organization undergoes major restructuring, it's not just about managing the financial impact or operational changes. It's about maintaining the human knowledge web that keeps complex security systems functioning effectively. As we'll see, this restructuring would soon prove to be more costly than anyone could have anticipated. Just wait until you see what happens when opportunistic attackers notice these kinds of vulnerabilities. Because trust me, they're watching. They're always watching. October 5th, 2024. While most of Japan was preparing for the weekend, a sophisticated cyber attack was already in motion. The underground ransomware group, a relatively new player in the cybercrime world, had CASIO in their crosshairs. Let me walk you through something fascinating here. See, what makes this attack particularly interesting is its timing. The underground group had only emerged in July 2023, but they weren't amateurs. They were connected to Romcom, a notorious Russian cybercrime group, also known as Storm 0978. Think of them as the special forces of the cyber underworld. Precise, methodical, and incredibly effective. The attack itself, it was like watching a master locksmith work, except this locksmith wasn't here to help. They exploited what we call CVE 2023 36884, a vulnerability in Microsoft Office and Windows HTML. Look at it this way. Imagine your computer's security is like a house with multiple locks. This vulnerability, it's like discovering that every house in the neighborhood has the same hidden spare key under the mat. Once the attackers found that key, they were in. Most ransomware attacks are noisy. They change file extensions, leave ransom notes everywhere. Not underground. Their malware was different. It encrypted files silently, without changing extensions. And before anyone could react, they executed a command. which basically destroyed all the backup copies of files Windows keeps for emergencies. Think of shadow copies like your computer's time machine. They're backup snapshots that can save you in a crisis. By deleting these first, Underground eliminated any chance of quick recovery. It's like burning the lifeboats before sinking the ship. The scale of what they stole is staggering. We're talking about confidential corporate documents, legal files, employee personal data, confidential NDAs, employee payroll information, patent details, financial documents, project information, and internal incident reports. They took everything. They didn't just steal it. They posted it all on their dark web extortion portal using platforms like Mega and Telegram to distribute the stolen data. On the dark web, where cybercriminals sell stolen data, it's not just about extortion. It's about reputation. It's an underground marketplace, yet a place to prove your worth. Hackers go here to show off, seeing who can get the biggest score. And they're showing other potential ransomware victims what happens if you don't pay up. What makes this attack particularly significant is its sophistication. This wasn't just about encrypting files for ransom. The underground group, backed by Romcom's expertise, executed a complex operation that combined data theft, system disruption, and public exposure. They didn't just want to extort money. They wanted to demonstrate their capabilities. And here's what should keep every corporate security officer awake at night. This attack showed that even temporary vulnerabilities, like a misconfigured security setting or an unpatched system, can lead to catastrophic breaches. The underground group only need one opening, one moment of vulnerability to compromise decades of corporate secrets. The clock struck midnight on October 5th, and CASIO's defenses had fallen. But this wasn't just another cyber attack. October 5th. CASIO's security team first noticed something was wrong. System failures started cascading across their network, classic signs of a major intrusion. But what happened next? That's where things get interesting. Any cybersecurity professional will tell you that the first thing you do is contain the spread. CASIO immediately started cutting external network access, basically isolating their systems from the outside world. It's like a digital quarantine. But here's the thing about modern cyber attacks. By the time you notice them, the damage is usually already done. CASIO brought in external forensic specialists. These are the digital detectives, the ones who go through system logs line by line, tracing every footprint the attackers left behind. They're looking for things most people would never notice. Unusual login patterns, modified system files, unexpected data transfers. But there's something about CASIO's response that really caught my attention. They immediately reported the breach to authorities. Now, you might think that's standard procedure, but you'd be surprised how many companies try to handle these things quietly. Transparency in cybersecurity. That's a big deal. The investigation process itself is like digital archaeology. These forensic teams are digging through layers of data, trying to figure out exactly what information was compromised. Personal data, financial records, internal documents, everything has to be checked. And remember, this is happening while they're still trying to keep their business running. The incident response team whipped out their playbooks and methodically checked every system, every database, every access log. Think about the scale here. CASIO's network spans decades of technology, from legacy systems to modern cloud infrastructure. That's a lot of ground to cover. The external access restrictions they put in place, that's just the first step. The real work is happening behind the scenes, rebuilding security configurations, patching vulnerabilities, verifying the integrity of backup systems. It's like trying to repair a ship while it's still at sea. But here's what really keeps me thinking about this case. The investigation is still ongoing. We don't know the full extent of what was taken, what might still be compromised. And that uncertainty, that's exactly what makes these kinds of attacks so devastating. Because in cybersecurity, what you don't know can definitely hurt you. This is just the beginning of the aftermath. Because once you start digging into a breach this size, you never know what else you might find. From where I stand in the hacker gallery watching the final pieces of this story fall into place, I can't help but appreciate the cruel irony. CASIO's journey from a small workshop in post-war Japan to a global tech giant reads like a classic tale of innovation and progress. But in cybersecurity, today's innovation often becomes tomorrow's vulnerability. Let's connect these dots, shall we? In just 15 months, we witnessed 3 devastating attacks, each more sophisticated than the last. First, that August 2023 legacy database leak. 1.2 million records exposed because of outdated systems that should have been retired years ago. Then, barely 2 months later, the ClassPad breach compromised nearly 127,000 users across 149 countries. And finally, the underground ransomware attack of October 2024, a sophisticated operation that brought parts of this tech giant to its knees. You see, this isn't just about CASIO. This is about a pattern I've observed repeatedly in the cybersecurity landscape. Companies innovate, expand, and transform digitally, but they often carry their technical debt like digital baggage. Every new system, every digital transformation creates what we call an attack surface. Think of it like leaving windows open in a house. The more windows you add, the more entry points you create for intruders. This pattern of escalating attacks suggests sophisticated threat actors are specifically targeting companies during periods of digital transformation and restructuring. Remember, you're only as strong as your oldest system. Those legacy databases that leaked in August 2023, that's like having a rusty old lock on your back door while guarding the front with your life. The underground ransomware attack wasn't just an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a year-long pattern of vulnerability exploitation, from a simple UBWA pipe in 1946 to complex digital systems in 2024. CASIO's evolution mirrors the broader challenge facing corporate cybersecurity. How do you maintain security when your attack surface grows with every innovation? Cybersecurity isn't just about protecting what you have now. It's about securing your entire technological legacy. Every piece of code, every database, every digital transformation initiative creates a permanent addition to your security responsibility. As we move to the next crazy story, remember this. CASIO's story isn't unique. In our rush to innovate and digitize, we're all building tomorrow's vulnerabilities today. The question isn't if these vulnerabilities will be exploited, but when and at what cost. The true price of progress? It might just be eternal vigilance. Let me know in the comments if you'll think about cybersecurity the next time you put on your G-Shock. I remember when malware was crude, simple scripts written by humans, predictable in their patterns. But July 2023, that's when everything changed. That's when the machines started writing malware. Let me show you something that keeps security professionals up at night. See this screen? This is WormGPT, the first AI specifically trained to write malicious code. Not just any code. We're talking sophisticated malware that adapts, evolves, and learns. It emerged on the dark web in early July 2023, and it was just the beginning. By July 25th, another player entered the game. FraudGPT. While WormGPT focused on malware, FraudGPT was built for the full spectrum of cybercrime. Phishing, spam, social engineering. And just when we thought we had a handle on the situation, August brought us something even more concerning. Dark Bart and Dark Bert emerged from the shadows. These weren't your average AI models. They were being developed specifically for sophisticated phishing, social engineering, vulnerability exploitation, and malware creation. Let me be clear about something. This wasn't just an upgrade to existing tools. This was a fundamental shift in how cybercrime operates. These AI systems could analyze vulnerabilities, generate convincing phishing emails, and even write malicious code, all faster and more effectively than any human hacker. What we were witnessing wasn't just the evolution of cybercrime tools. It was the beginning of an AI arms race in the underground hacking world. And trust me, this was just the opening move in a much larger game. I want you to do something for me right now. Look at that glass of water on your desk, or maybe turn on your tap for a second. Seems simple, right? But what I'm about to tell you might make you think twice about how vulnerable that simple necessity really is. In late 2023, I was monitoring my threat feeds when something caught my attention. A group called Cyber Avengers had just pulled off something quite disgusting, really. They'd successfully compromised the Municipal Water Authority of Aliquippa in Pennsylvania, specifically targeting their Programmable Logic Controllers, or PLCs. PLCs are essentially the brain of industrial systems. They're specialized computers that control physical processes. In this case, the entire water treatment and distribution system for thousands of people. These aren't your typical computers. They're hardened industrial systems designed to run 24/7. And they control everything from water pressure to chemical treatment levels. While we were still analyzing the Pennsylvania attack, another hit came in, this time from across the Atlantic. County Mayo, Ireland, experienced a complete disruption of their water services that lasted 2 full days. 2 days without reliable water service in a modern, developed nation. The Cyber Avengers group wasn't just hitting random targets. Based on intelligence gathered, they developed a specific focus on industrial control systems, water facilities, manufacturing plants, energy systems, the very infrastructure that keeps our society running. They'd found a way to bridge the gap between the digital and physical worlds, turning cyber attacks into real-world consequences. So what does this have to do with artificial intelligence? Well, the Cyber Avengers, who are actually a part of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's right. Iranian state-backed hackers were using ChatGPT to conduct research into programmable logic controllers during their attacks. That's right. Accounts operated by this threat actor used OpenAI's models to research vulnerabilities, debug code, and ask for scripting advice. It's not known how they were identified, but OpenAI said they were detected based on a tip-off. I'm seeing patterns in these attacks that suggest this is just the beginning. The targeting of water systems and using AI isn't random. It's a calculated move to exploit one of our most basic needs. Before we go further into hackers using artificial intelligence, let me first set the scene. I want to tell you about an event that rocked cybersecurity researchers in August 2023. I remember when Cisco Talos first discovered it. It was a piece of malware so sophisticated it was scary. They called it Sugar Ghost Rat. Now, before you think this is just another virus, let me explain what makes this different. Sugar Ghost is what we call a remote access Trojan, basically a sophisticated spy tool that gives attackers complete control over infected systems. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't some random attack. The targets? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Uzbekistan and users in South Korea. The technical brilliance of this attack is fascinating. The malware itself is a 32-bit DLL. Think of it as a specialized piece of code that can hide inside legitimate Windows processes. But what really caught my attention was its infection chain. It starts with a simple RAR file containing what looks like a harmless Windows shortcut. But that shortcut? It's just the first domino. When clicked, it triggers a cascade of events, dropping JavaScript, which then deploys multiple components, including a decoy document to avoid suspicion. It was like a Russian nesting doll. The really clever part is how it phones home. The attackers set up command and control servers disguised as Google Drive domains. Pretty sneaky, right? Once installed, Sugar Ghost starts collecting everything. Computer name, operating system details, drive information, specific registry keys, basically creating a complete profile of the infected system. This isn't just about technical sophistication. This is about state-level actors using increasingly advanced tools to target government institutions. And remember, this is just the beginning of what's to come. This story isn't about how we stop tools like Sugar Ghost. It's what happens when malware, like Sugar Ghost, gets enhanced by artificial intelligence. And that's exactly what the hackers behind it did. You know what fascinates me? How quickly things can go from interesting technology to weapon of choice. I've been tracking this stuff since last year, and let me tell you, what cybersecurity researchers are seeing right now would make any person lose sleep. Storm 0817, another Iranian hacker group, isn't just using ChatGPT for basic coding. They're actually getting it to debug Android malware. Think about that for a second. The same AI that helps people write emails is being used to perfect code that could compromise millions of phones. These guys aren't just focused on one thing. They're running a full-spectrum operation. While they're developing their Android malware, they're also building Instagram scrapers, tools that can harvest massive amounts of personal data from social media profiles. And get this, they're using AI to translate LinkedIn profiles into Persian. Why? Well, because they're Iranian, of course. Just as I'm diving deeper into Storm 0817's activities, another alert hit my system. Remember that Sugar Ghost Rat campaign I told you about from August 2023? Well, the story didn't end there. I've been tracking these actors across my monitoring systems, and what I'm seeing is a masterclass in threat actor evolution. The same Chinese group that deployed Sugar Ghost Rat against Uzbekistan and South Korean targets, which have now been given the name Sweet Spectre, didn't just stick to their old playbook. By December 2023, they'd made a fascinating pivot. Instead of relying solely on traditional malware deployment, they started leveraging AI to enhance their operations. What I'm looking at right now is particularly clever. Sweet Spectre is using ChatGPT to craft incredibly convincing phishing campaigns, but they're still delivering their signature Sugar Ghost Rat. It's like watching a predator evolve in real time. They've taken their existing malware and wrapped it in AI-generated sophistication. The technical progression here is remarkable. Sweet Spectre went from using basic social engineering to deploy their rat to having AI help craft their lures. They're even impersonating ChatGPT users to target OpenAI employees. Think about that for a second. Luring the employees who actually work on ChatGPT. What makes this especially concerning is how they're combining their proven Sugar Ghost Rat, which we know was extremely effective from their previous campaigns, with AI-enhanced delivery methods. Each phishing attempt is now more convincing, more personalized, and significantly harder to detect. Remember when we thought AI would just be about chatbots and image generation? Yeah, those days are long gone. Welcome to the new reality of AI-powered cyber operations. Early 2024 brought something I'd been dreading since the first AI models went mainstream. There, in my threat feeds, was Proofpoint's report of what appeared to be the first confirmed AI-generated malware in the wild. And let me tell you, this wasn't some script kiddies weekend project. The PowerShell script that I saw in this report was unlike anything I'd seen before. Every single line, and I mean every line, had perfect, grammatically flawless comments explaining its purpose. In all my years analyzing malware, I've never seen code documented this meticulously. It was like finding a professionally edited novel where you'd expect to see bathroom wall graffiti. The threat actor, tracked as TA547, was using this AI-crafted PowerShell script as part of their Radamanthys Stealer campaign. Let me walk you through their attack chain, because it's a masterclass in modern malware deployment. It starts with a phishing email, classic entry point. But here's where it gets interesting. The victim receives a zip file, password protected with MAR26, just innocent looking enough to bypass suspicion. Inside, a Windows shortcut file that triggers a remote PowerShell script, our AI-generated masterpiece. This script then delivers the final payload, the Radamanthys Stealer. What makes this particularly concerning isn't just the malware itself, it's what it represents. We're seeing AI being used to create malicious code that's not only functional but perfectly documented. It's like having a professional software developer working for the bad guys, producing enterprise-grade malware. Daniel Blackford from Proofpoint said it best. This script's impeccable documentation is what gave away its artificial origins. Think about that. The malware was so well written it couldn't have been human. We're entering an era where AI isn't just assisting cybercriminals, it's outperforming them. In February 2024, OpenAI launched what might be the biggest coordinated blocking action I've ever seen against state-sponsored hacker groups. We're talking simultaneous takedowns across China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. Let me show you what I'm seeing here. First, there's Storm 2035, pumping out political influence content like a factory. They're not just posting random propaganda. They're using AI to generate sophisticated articles and comments in multiple languages. English, Spanish, the works. This isn't your typical bot farm. This is next-level stuff. But that's just the beginning. Look at this. The Stop News operation. These guys are running a full-blown fake news network, generating content in English, French, and Russian. The AI-generated articles are so well-crafted that they're nearly indistinguishable from human-written content. Also, there is the A2Z operation, which was running cross-platform attacks, using OpenAI's API to create comments across multiple social media platforms. And here's where it gets really interesting. There's a Rwandan group specifically targeting election content, and a network called BitterAPT that's using AI to generate convincing gambling scam conversations on X. These state-sponsored groups aren't just using AI as a tool. They're weaponizing it for mass influence operations. They're generating content, manipulating social media, and running influence campaigns at a scale we've never seen before. Imagine how many other AI-powered influence campaigns are still out there on your favorite social media platforms, writing comments, or doing God knows what, running completely undetected. It's sort of like the dead internet theory you've probably heard being thrown around a lot lately. Well, looks like it's coming true. March 2024. After that massive takedown of state-sponsored operations in February, I watched OpenAI transform from a target into a fortress. You know what's fascinating about this? They didn't just patch holes. They completely revolutionized their defensive strategy. I'm looking at their implementation timeline right now, and it's impressive. They didn't just form security teams. They built specialized units dedicated to hunting down AI abuse. Think about it. Teams of experts whose sole job is to spot when someone's trying to turn their AI into a weapon. The monitoring technology they've developed. It's like nothing we've seen before with AI models. To all you AI naysayers out there, this is a good thing for you. These systems are constantly watching, learning, adapting. Every time a threat actor tries to use their models for malicious purposes, the system flags it. And they're not working alone anymore. They've established partnerships across the tech industry, sharing threat intelligence in real time. Let me show you something incredible. Since the beginning of 2024, they've disrupted more than 20 separate malicious operations. Each one of these could have been another Sweet Spectre or Storm 0817, but they never got the chance. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre just released their assessment of where this is all heading. And it's not good news. We're not just looking at more attacks, we're looking at smarter ones. Ransomware groups are evolving hardcore right now. They're not just using AI to write better phishing emails anymore. They're using it for everything. Reconnaissance, coding, even finding vulnerabilities we haven't discovered yet. The NCSC's report confirms what I'm seeing. This trend isn't slowing down. It's accelerating. As I sit here watching these threat feeds scroll by, I can't help but think we're at a turning point. The next year will determine whether AI becomes the ultimate weapon or the ultimate shield. Let me know in the comments, are you scared of what AI is about to become, or will you embrace it? Think about it. If hackers can use AI against us, then we can use it against them too. There are companies out there, like SentinelOne, not sponsored, by the way, that might just revolutionize endpoint detection and response with their AI technology. Think about it. A program installed on a computer that uses AI to detect hacker behavior. Companies that are integrating AI into their tools might just be the future. However, only time will tell. The next few years will certainly be a turning point in the world as we know it. Stay tuned. The next story is coming right up. October 2016. This date was special. It marked the emergence of what appeared to be just another banking Trojan. But appearances in cybersecurity are often deceiving. I'm speaking to you from the Hacker Gallery, where we document the most significant cyber threats and attacks of our time. And let me tell you something. What I'm about to share isn't just another malware story. This is the origin of TrickBot. You see, when TrickBot first appeared in the wild, it presented itself as relatively simple. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with banking Trojans, imagine a virus, like a horrific parasite that silently buries itself into your computer, watching and waiting for you to log into your bank account. Every keystroke, every password, every account number, all harvested and transmitted back to its master. But this wasn't ordinary. In fact, it was far from it. Behind TrickBot stood Wizard Spider, a sophisticated Russian cybercrime group that would prove to be one of the most methodical and patient threat actors I've ever studied. These weren't amateur hackers throwing random attacks at the wall and seeing what sticks. These guys are as professional as it gets, and they were playing the long game. What makes this story particularly fascinating is how TrickBot was designed from day one. While other malware operators were building single-purpose tools, Wizard Spider created something modular, a tool that could evolve and adapt. Each component was tagged with what we call G tags, unique campaign identifiers that I'm showing you here, that help them track and manage their various operations. Now, this is crucial to understanding what made TrickBot different. Traditional malware is like a bullet. You can shoot with it, but once the cover is blown, it's basically useless. But TrickBot was more like a missile guidance system that could be updated mid-flight. The core malware could receive new modules, new capabilities, new instructions, all while remaining hidden on infected systems. What started as a credential thief would become one of cybercrime's most sophisticated weapons. But this was just the beginning. Wizard Spider wasn't just building malware. They were building an advanced tool, backed with military-level network infrastructure that would become one of the most devastating cybercrime operations. As you'll soon find out, this seemingly simple banking Trojan evolved into something far more sinister. But to understand where we're going, you needed to understand where it all began. In October 2016, with a piece of malware that appeared to be nothing special, created by a group that would prove to be anything but ordinary. I've spent years analyzing malware, and let me tell you, this is when I realized we were dealing with something completely different. These G tags weren't just random identifiers. They were customer codes. Yes, you heard that right. Wizard Spider wasn't just building malware. They were running a profit-driven service. The modular architecture they developed was revolutionary. Instead of deploying a single piece of malware, they created a framework that could receive new components on the fly. Let's look a little bit more into how this thing works. Imagine your computer as a city, and TrickBot as an invading army. The initial infection is just a flare shot into the sky. It's a small piece of code that establishes vision and lets them obtain a foothold. But once it's in, it starts calling home to its command and control servers, downloading specialized modules like Password Grab and SOCKS. Now, Password Grab, or PW Grab, that's their credential theft module. It's like having a spy that watches every password you type, every login you make. But the SOCKS module, that's where they take it a step further. It creates hidden tunnels in your network, allowing the attackers to move around undetected. We call this lateral movement in cybersecurity. Let me explain lateral movement quickly. Think of it like you're in a building where you have a key to one room. Normal malware would be stuck in that room. But TrickBot? It uses the credentials it steals to move from room to room, computer to computer, spreading through entire networks using legitimate tools like SMB, server message block. It's the same protocol your computer uses to share files with other computers on your network. The scary part? This isn't just theoretical. I've seen networks where TrickBot started on a single infected computer and within hours had spread to dozens of systems. It uses the stolen credentials from password grab to authenticate itself, making it almost impossible to distinguish from legitimate network traffic. This is brilliant, because it's how they laid the groundwork for something much bigger. Wizard Spider wasn't just building a better trap. They were creating an entire ecosystem of cyber weapons. Each module could be updated independently. Each campaign tracked separately through those G tags we talked about. And each infection could be customized for specific targets. This is organized crime at the highest level, operating with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. And as we'll see, this was just the beginning of Wizard Spider's grand plan. Stay with me, because what happens next with this evolution changed everything we knew. August 2018. That's when everything changed. Listen, I've been tracking malware evolution for years, but what Wizard Spider unleashed that summer was something else entirely. They called it Ryuk. Let me break from the story for a moment to explain something crucial. You see, ransomware isn't just about locking files. It's about making them completely inaccessible while ensuring you can still restore them if the ransom is paid. This feature is what made Ryuk really frightening. Ryuk wasn't built from scratch. It was derived from another ransomware called Hermes. But what Wizard Spider did with that code was crazy. They implemented a dual-layer encryption system using RSA-2048 and AES-256. Now I know that sounds like a bit much, but let me explain why this matters. Imagine you have a document. AES-256 encryption is like putting that document in an unbreakable safe. But then where do you keep the safe's combination? That's where RSA-2048 comes in. It's like having a second, even more secure safe just for storing that combination. We're talking about mathematical calculations so complex that even the world's most powerful computers would need millions of years to crack them. But here's where Wizard Spider showed their true genius. They didn't just encrypt files, they went after the backups too. Every Windows system has something called shadow copies, essentially backup snapshots of your files. Ryuk deliberately hunts these down and destroys them. Then it drops its calling card. When you see that file on your system, you know you're in serious trouble. What really sets Ryuk apart, though, is its targeting strategy. Wizard Spider wasn't interested in regular users anymore. They went big game hunting, if you will. We're talking major corporations, hospitals, government agencies, organizations that can't afford to be offline and have deep pockets. Think about it. If you encrypt a home user's computer, maybe you get a few $100s. But a hospital that can't access patient records, a manufacturing plant with production lines at a standstill, now you're talking millions. It's a brutal calculation, but an effective one. The technical sophistication of Ryuk matched this disgustingly brutal strategy. The encryption implementation was flawless. No backdoors, no shortcuts. No weaknesses to exploit. If Ryuk encrypted your files and you didn't have offline backups, you had exactly two choices: pay up or lose everything. This wasn't just another piece of ransomware. This was ransomware elevated to an art form. Wizard Spider had effectively created a digital doomsday device that could bring any organization to its knees within hours. And remember, this is just the ransomware component we're talking about. They still had TrickBot in their arsenal, and as we'll see, these two tools would soon work together in ways that will shake you to your core. It wasn't just about causing chaos or stealing data. This was about maximizing profit through carefully planned, strategically executed attacks against targets that simply couldn't say no. The emergence of Ryuk marked the moment when cybercrime truly became big business. Let me tell you about the moment cybersecurity researchers realized we were dealing with something unprecedented. Security firms started tracking an operation they called Temp Mix Master, and what they found was mind-blowing. Wizard Spider had effectively created the perfect cyber weapon by combining TrickBot and Ryuk into a devastating 1-2 punch. What we're talking about here is a multi-stage attack. Think of it like a military operation. You don't just send in the heavy artillery first. You start with reconnaissance, then establish a foothold, then bring in your main force. That's exactly what Temp Mixmaster did. Phase 1. TrickBot would infiltrate a network. Just like we discussed earlier, it would steal credentials, map out the network, identify valuable targets. But here's where things got interesting. Instead of just automatically spreading through the network like earlier versions, the operators would actually take manual control. You see, Wizard Spider realized something profound. Automation is great for initial access, but nothing beats human intelligence for the final stages of an attack. Here's how it would typically play out. TrickBot gets in and establishes what we call a reverse shell. Imagine a secret tunnel back to the attacker's command center. Through this tunnel, they'd set up remote desktop protocol, or RDP connections, giving them the same level of control as if they were sitting right in front of the target computer. Now they'd use a tool called FASTCash, another legitimate system administration tool, to deploy Ryuk. The actual command looks something like this. This command might look simple, but it's devastating in its effectiveness. By using legitimate tools and manual control, Wizard Spider made their attacks nearly impossible to detect. Think about it. How do you distinguish a malicious administrative action from a legitimate one when they're using the same tools? The genius of this operation wasn't just in the tools they used, but in the patience they showed. They wouldn't rush to deploy Ryuk. They'd wait, sometimes for weeks, mapping networks, stealing credentials, ensuring they had everything in place for maximum impact. When they finally struck, they could encrypt hundreds or even thousands of computers simultaneously. FireEye, CrowdStrike, and other security firms were documenting case after case of this pattern. Organizations would detect TrickBot, think they had contained it, only to be hit with Ryuk weeks later. The partnership between TrickBot and Ryuk wasn't the end of Wizard Spider's evolution. As we'll see, they were about to take things to an entirely new level with their next innovation. The numbers are staggering, my friends. Through just 52 transactions, across 37 Bitcoin addresses, Wizard Spider raked in over 705 Bitcoin. That's approximately $75 million as of November 2024. But as they got better at attacking companies around the world, something scary was happening. Researchers observed that this might not have just been about the money anymore. They were after something far more valuable. You know how every large organization has an employee directory? Within an internal network that's called Active Directory, or AD. But it's not just a simple phone book. It's got the details to every user, every computer in the network. It contains every user account, every password hash, every permission setting for an entire enterprise. Imagine having access to not just the building's front door, but every single room, every filing cabinet, every safe. That's what Active Directory access gives you. Now, security researcher Sandor Nemes discovered something. Wizard Spider had developed a new TrickBot module. It was called ADLL. TrickBot's new ADLL module takes advantage of the install from media command to dump the Active Directory database and various registry hives to the temp folder. So, these files from the Active Directory database are compressed and sent back to the attackers. I need you to understand the technical brilliance here. The module executed a simple but devastating command through the NT Directory Service utility, a command line tool that allows users to manage Active Directory in a Windows server. In terms of that command, well, it looks like a big mess. But what it's actually doing is creating a perfect copy of the Active Directory database, complete with every credential, every security policy, every access right in the entire organization. Think about this for a second. With this level of access, Wizard Spider didn't just have the ability to encrypt files. They had the power to completely take over entire corporate networks. They could create new admin accounts, modify security policies, or even lock out the legitimate administrators. It was like having a master key that could also change all the locks. The genius of this approach was in its simplicity. The NT Directory Service Utility command they used. That's a legitimate Windows administration tool. There's nothing inherently malicious about it. It's like using the building's own maintenance equipment to crack the safe. It doesn't trigger any alarms because it's supposed to be there. Wizard Spider wasn't just breaking into networks anymore. They were systematically extracting their most valuable assets. With this information, they could return at any time, through any door, wearing any identity they chose. But here's what really gets me. This wasn't just about immediate financial gain. By stealing Active Directory databases, Wizard Spider was playing a long game. Even if an organization paid the ransom and recovered from the Ryuk encryption, the attackers still had access. They could come back months or even years later, using different identities each time. The scale of these operations was unprecedented, but in saying that, even the true scope of Wizard Spider's operations may never be fully understood. Anyway, if you thought that was bad, then get ready for me to take this to the next level. Their operation went in a direction that would change the way you look at your mobile phone forever. So, yeah. If it wasn't obvious, well, Wizard Spider wasn't content with just compromising desktop systems. In a brazen move that caught even veteran security researchers off guard, they expanded their arsenal to the mobile space with a variant that would become known as TrickMo. You see, as banks started implementing stronger security measures, like two-factor authentication, the criminals adapted. TrickMo wasn't just another mobile malware. It was specifically engineered to bypass the very security measures designed to protect against banking fraud. TrickMo, the mobile malware, implemented screen recording capabilities, not just static screenshots, but full video capture of your device's screen. While you're entering that one-time password from your bank, it's watching. When you're typing in that transaction authentication number, it's recording every single digit. But what really sets TrickMo apart, and I need you to understand this, is its persistence mechanism. Most mobile malware simply tries to run at device boot. TrickMo? It's far more sophisticated. It leverages Android's alarm manager system to ensure it stays active, registering listeners for both screen activation and SMS delivery events. Think of it as having multiple backup plans to stay alive on your device. Traditional mobile malware was relatively easy to detect because it would drain your battery trying to stay active all the time. But by using Android's own scheduling system, TrickMo appears legitimate to the operating system while maintaining constant surveillance. It's the difference between a clumsy burglar and an expert thief. What makes this evolution particularly concerning is how it complements TrickBot's existing capabilities. The desktop component could compromise your computer, then push TrickMo to your Android device, creating a complete surveillance system around your banking activities. It's a one-two punch that demonstrates Wizard Spider's power. In 2024, Wizard Spider unleashed their most sophisticated version of TrickMo yet. And let me tell you, this is where things get really interesting. They've added something that security researchers never saw coming: the ability to steal your device's unlock pattern or PIN, even when your phone is locked. Previous mobile malware could only operate when your device was unlocked. This new capability? They create a perfect copy of your phone's lock screen. So perfect, you'd never know it wasn't the real thing. During our investigation of their command and control servers, we discovered something crazy. Over 13,000 unique IP addresses. That's 13,000 compromised devices, each one representing a potential victim. If you want to know if you're at risk, well, it looks like they're specifically targeting 4 countries: Canada, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Germany. This isn't random when you really think about it, because these countries represent major financial centers with high mobile banking adoption rates. The fake lock screen isn't just a static image. It's a dynamic HTML page hosted externally, allowing the attackers to update and modify it on the fly. And for all their victims worldwide, every piece of stolen data is meticulously tagged with the victim's Android ID, which means they can create a perfectly organized database of targets. What started as a simple banking Trojan in 2016 has evolved into a sophisticated cyber weapon that combines social engineering, technical exploitation, and precise targeting. They evolved from simple malware to a full-scale financial surveillance platform. As our world becomes dependent on mobile banking and digital transactions, this kind of threat is only going to get worse. Leave a comment below if you ever thought you might have had TrickBot infection on your computer, or TrickMo infection on your mobile phone. And if you enjoyed it, make sure to like the video, or share, as you never know. You might just save them from complete financial destruction. Welcome to the Hacker Gallery. I'm the operator, and today I'm going to tell you about something that started innocently enough but evolved into one of the most widespread cyber threats we've ever seen. The year is 2014. On a Turkish website, a new computer monitoring tool appears. They called it Agent Tesla, advertised as a simple way to keep tabs on your own computer. Legitimate use case, right? Well, that's what makes this story so fascinating. Here's where it gets interesting. Agent Tesla wasn't some crude hack job. It was built on Microsoft's .NET framework, professional-grade development technology. But its initial capabilities were basic. It could log keystrokes and send the data through email using SMTP protocol. Nothing too fancy, nothing too alarming. But this is the thing. You could buy it for as little as $15. Maximum price? $69. I want you to think about that. For the price of a decent dinner, anyone could get their hands on what would become one of the most notorious remote access Trojans, or rats as we call them in the security world. By 2018, something unprecedented happened. Security firm Lastline reported a 100% increase in Agent Tesla detections in just 3 months. Yeah, just doubling in 90 days. This wasn't just malware anymore. This was the emergence of something we now call malware as a service. Just like you subscribe to Netflix or Spotify, cybercriminals could now subscribe to malware. What you're about to witness is more than just the story of a single piece of malware. It's the beginning of a new era in cybercrime, where sophisticated digital weapons became available to anyone with spare change and bad intentions. And Agent Tesla? It was just the beginning. Stay with me, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you might think. We're about to see how this simple monitoring tool set the stage for one of the most sophisticated cyber attack chains ever documented. What happened next is where this story gets dark. By 2017, Agent Tesla wasn't just logging keystrokes anymore. It had evolved into something far more dangerous. The original version could only send stolen data through email protocols. We call that SMTP exfiltration. But in 2017, they added FTP capabilities. Think about that. Now it could upload stolen data directly to remote servers. And they didn't stop there. We'll get to it later in the story. But modern versions can send data through HTTP web protocols and even Telegram messaging. Agent Tesla didn't just expand its delivery methods. It became a vacuum cleaner, if you will, for credentials. We're talking about the ability to steal login information from over 55 different applications. Your browsers, your email clients, your FTP programs, nothing was safe. And the sophistication of its stealth capabilities? They implemented something called process hollowing, essentially hiding malicious code inside legitimate Windows processes. It's like a digital Russian doll, but each layer is designed to hide from security tools. The developers even added anti-analysis features. These are specifically designed to detect if someone's trying to study it. If it detects a debugger or a sandbox environment, it changes its behavior or shuts down completely. They're using exclusive or encoding for their configuration files, which basically means it combines a secret key with the configuration files to encrypt them, making it harder to understand how the malware is set up. But here's the most concerning part. All these sophisticated features were available to anyone willing to pay. The malware maintained its presence in the Windows registry through current version run keys, ensuring the program is executed when a user logs in, meaning it can stay active even after system restarts. What we're looking at isn't just malware evolution. It's the democratization of sophisticated cyber weapons. Every new feature, every improvement made Agent Tesla more dangerous, more resilient, and more attractive to cybercriminals. And this was just the beginning of a trend that would reshape the entire cybercrime landscape. The rapid adoption in cybercriminal circles told us something crucial. The barrier to entry for sophisticated cyberattacks was crumbling. And as I'll show you next, this was just the first piece of something much, much larger. In January 2020, something changed in the malware landscape. Deep Instinct's threat research team discovered what looked like a professional software product. But this wasn't your typical enterprise software. This was Dark Vision Rat, and it was about to redefine what we thought possible in the malware as a service market. Here's what made Dark Vision different. Instead of relying on frameworks like .NET, its developers built it from the ground up using C++ and assembly language. That's like building a car from raw metal instead of using pre-made parts. This was professional-grade malware development. The architecture was revolutionary. They created a modular system with 17 different plugins, each one a separate component that could be mixed and matched. Think about that. 17 different tools for everything from capturing keystrokes to taking screenshots, manipulating files, and even executing remote code on infected systems. But the real genius was in the command and control system. They developed a custom binary protocol for communication, their own private language for talking to infected machines. Each compromised computer got a unique identifier, combining a random GUD with an MD5 hash of the text string that resembled the word password. It's like giving each infected machine its own digital fingerprint. The marketing was equally sophisticated. Priced at just $40, they weren't targeting high-end cybercrime organizations. They were after the mass market, promising quick deployment and ease of use. Minutes to deploy, their ads claimed. And they weren't wrong. The modular design meant you could have it up and running faster than you could install most legitimate software. What really gets me is how they handled the technical implementation. Each infected machine would send detailed fingerprint information back to the control server. Everything from system time to admin status. The control server would respond with a simple acknowledgement, 4 bytes that said, "Message received, continue operation." But here's what makes this story truly terrifying. This wasn't just another piece of malware. This was a glimpse into the future of cybercrime. Professional development practices, modular design, enterprise-grade architecture, all packaged and priced for the mass market. The line between legitimate software development and malware creation had just become dangerously thin. And as we'll see next, this was just the beginning of a trend that would reshape the entire cybercrime landscape. In March 2021, a threat actor calling themselves PureCoder launched something that would change the game entirely. They released a tool called PureCryptor. Now, this wasn't just another piece of malware. It was a masterclass in digital deception, and it was available to anyone with $59. What made PureCryptor different was its sophisticated multi-stage approach. Imagine opening what looks like a single program, but it's actually 3 different programs nested inside each other, each one designed to confuse and evade security software. The first stage is a .NET downloader encrypted with DDES. That's military-grade encryption using 3 different keys instead of 1. The second stage brings in what's called a donut loader, using the Chasqui block cipher. Think of it as a lock that keeps changing its shape as you try to pick it. But the third stage? That's where things get really interesting. The PureCryptor core itself, using Google's protocol buffers, or protobuf for configuration. Let me explain why this is significant. Protobuf is Google's way of packaging data so it's easy to send between different systems. It's like a universal translator that any computer can understand. But here's the clever part. Because it's a legitimate Google format, It doesn't trigger the same red flags that typical malware configurations do. It's like smuggling something in your food at the airport. Looks completely legitimate at a glance. But PureCryptor wasn't done innovating. It can detect if it's running in a virtual machine. That's like being able to tell if you're in a police sting operation. Security researchers use virtual machines to safely study malware, so this detection capability makes analysis much harder. The whole thing is wrapped in something called smart assembly obfuscation. Imagine trying to read a book where all the letters have been scrambled, but the program can still understand it perfectly. It uses 3 different methods to hide malicious code inside legitimate processes: process hollowing, shell code injection, and assembly loading. That's like having 3 different ways to sneak past security, each with its own backup plan. Even if you manage to spot it, PureCryptor maintains its presence through registry mechanisms. It's like having multiple fake IDs and backup hideouts. The commands it receives are disguised using base64 encoding, making malicious instructions look like random text until they're decoded. The most disturbing part? This wasn't some secret government cyber weapon. This was commercial software, marketed openly, with professional development and support. For the price of a video game, anyone could buy malware that uses the same data format as Google's own products. And, as we'll see next, when tools like PureCryptor start combining with other malware, the results are nothing short of devastating. July 2024. Zscaler. Threat Labs discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about malware attacks. The 3 tools we've discussed, they found them working together in what might be the most sophisticated attack chain I've ever seen. I'm not joking when I say that. Let me explain. The attack starts with what looks like a normal program file, but it's actually the first stage of something much more sinister. This initial program uses triple DES encryption, just like the last one I explained. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The encryption keys are hidden using something called base64 encoding. Base64 is like a universal translator for computer data. It converts complex binary code into regular text characters that can hide in plain sight. The attackers use 2 pieces, a main key and what we call an initialization vector, basically a starting point for the encryption process. The command and control server, that's the system sending instructions to infected computers, uses a clever trick called exclusive or encoding. Imagine having 2 pieces of paper with holes in them. When you stack them together, only certain holes line up to reveal the hidden message. That's basically what the exclusive OR key does. It scrambles the commands so they look like nonsense until they reach their destination. The attack happens in 4 precise stages. First, a disguised program protected against analysis. Then, a specialized loader that prepares the system. Next, PureCryptor sneaks in and sets up shop. Finally, Dark Vision Rat takes control. To hide itself, the malware creates a folder in your computer's app data directory, a place where legitimate programs store their data, and disguises itself as a photo storage program. What makes this attack so significant is how these different pieces work together. Each tool was originally sold separately for cheap on the criminal market, but combined, they create something as sophisticated as the cyber weapons usually reserved for nation-state hackers. This is the future of cyber threats, where anyone with a few $100s can build an attack chain that would have been impossible for all but the most skilled hackers just a few years ago. We're not just seeing malware evolution anymore. We're witnessing the rapid transformation of advanced cyber weapons. This isn't the end of evolution, though. It's just the beginning of a new era where sophisticated attacks become available to anyone with basic technical skills and bad intentions. Let me show you what makes these modern attacks so difficult to defend against. When we look under the hood of Dark Vision Rat, we find something both fascinating and terrifying. A system for creating detailed profiles of infected computers. Let me explain. First, let's talk about fingerprinting. Inside Dark Vision's code, there's a structure Think of it as a digital form that gets filled out for every infected computer. It starts with a hard-coded value, which is like a signature saying, "This is Dark Vision Rat." Then it assigns a code name to the infected network. In this real-world example, Apple X. The really clever part? It checks if the infected user has administrator privileges. This is crucial because admin access means the malware can do pretty much anything on the system. It's like having the master key to a building instead of just a key to one room. But here's where it gets sophisticated. Dark Vision uses something called DLL hijacking. When your computer runs a program, it looks for certain support files called DLLs. DLL hijacking is when malware places its own malicious DLL in a location where Windows will load it instead of the legitimate one. It's like replacing a security guard with someone wearing the same uniform, but working for the criminals. The malware also uses process injection, a technique where it forces its malicious code into legitimate running programs. Imagine a virus that can hide inside your computer's immune system. That's essentially what process injection does. Combined with auto-elevation techniques, it can quietly gain administrator privileges without triggering security alerts. For cybersecurity professionals, this creates a nightmare scenario. The malware creates detailed profiles of infected systems, uses legitimate Windows features against themselves, hides malicious traffic in legitimate-looking formats, gains high-level system access without alerting users, and maintains long-term control without detection. Each infected computer reports back with precise details about its system time, running processes, and security status. The attackers know exactly what they've infected and how to maintain control. When malware authors start building their code like professional software developers, using industry-standard practices and formats, the line between legitimate and malicious code becomes dangerously thin. And better yet, when tools this sophisticated are available to anyone with a credit card, the whole game changes. In 2014, Agent Tesla appeared with basic email-based data theft capabilities, what we call SMTP exfiltration. It cost as little as $15. Think about that. The price of a few coffees for a piece of malware. By 2017, it had evolved to include FTP capabilities, the ability to directly upload stolen data to remote servers. In 2020, Dark Vision Rat emerges. They're not even trying to hide what it is anymore. They're marketing it like a professional software product. For $40 to $60, you get what they call a server. That's their professional-sounding term for an infected computer. It's literally being sold like a business service. Then 2022 brings us Pure Cryptor at $59. Each of these tools represented a leap forward in sophistication, yet the price barely increased. We're talking about professional-grade cyber weapons being sold for less than a video game. But 2024, that's when everything changed. And these tools started working together in coordinated attacks. Imagine buying 3 separate tools, each sophisticated in its own right, for the total price of about $150, and combining them into something that rivals nation-state level cyber weapons. This is the industrialization of cybercrime. These aren't shadowy hackers writing code in dark rooms. These are professional developers creating commercial products. They have marketing strategies. They have pricing models. They have customer support. They have a live chat. Maybe soon they might even have an account representative. The tools are being built to work together, and their attack chains leave advanced security systems struggling to keep up. The barrier to entry isn't just getting lower, it's practically disappearing. You don't need to be a technical genius anymore. You don't need massive resources. These days, anyone who knows the right place to look can access tools that a few years ago would have required teams of skilled hackers to develop. The future of cybersecurity is changing every damn day. Welcome to the new normal in the underground world of hacking. The question isn't if we'll see more sophisticated attacks. It's coming, right now, and they're only going to get worse. If you enjoy the videos, please consider supporting me by subscribing to the channel. But regardless of what you do, I will never stop making content for you. So soak up as much cybersecurity information and news from me as you can, as most people don't talk about this kind of stuff. And lastly, I hope you enjoy. North Korea, a country known for its secrecy and isolation, has been quietly building up a cyber army. And I'm not talking about a few guys in a basement with laptops. We're looking at a sophisticated operation which has one goal: to hack and steal their way to victory. North Korea's cyber capabilities aren't just some side project. These operations are supporting their long-term political and national security goals, as well as helping them make some serious cash. We're talking espionage, destructive attacks, and straight-up financial crimes. Most of this shady business is being run by a group called the Reconnaissance General Bureau, or RGB. Think of them as North Korea's CIA, but with a focus on cyber warfare. These guys are the real deal, led by none other than the world's most infamous dictator, Kim Jong-un. North Korea has many different hacking groups, but I'm going to talk about one you probably haven't heard of before. They go by the name ScarCruft. I'm not making this up. This group is one seriously elite team of hackers. They're known for their tactics and have been linked to the world's most high-profile cyber attacks. North Korea's Ministry of State Security, or the MSS, are also linked to this hacking operation. They operate as an autonomous part of the government, and they are primarily tasked with domestic counter-espionage and overseas counterintelligence activities. StarCruft and other North Korean hackers' activities align with the agenda of MSS, which is something important to know for later in the story. Let me tell you now, when we start digging into this stuff, you may not like it. This story is like peeling back layers of an onion. Each layer reveals more complexity, more sophistication. As we go deeper into this story, you're going to see just how far-reaching and impactful these operations really are, and what their goal really is. Cyber warfare is real, and North Korea is on the offensive. Without further ado, let's get right into the thick of it. In 2022, they really stepped up their game. So here's what happened. Microsoft decided to block macros in Office documents by default in July 2022. Macros are like little programs inside documents that can do all sorts of things. They're super useful, but they can also be really dangerous if someone with bad intentions gets their hands on them. ScarCruft, being the clever hackers they are, saw this change coming. They thought, okay, our old tricks won't work anymore. Time to switch it up. And that's exactly what they did. They started using something called LNK files. Now, LNK files are basically shortcuts in Windows. You know, those little arrow icons you see on your desktop? Those are LNK files. But ScarCruft wasn't using them to open your favorite game. No, they were using them to deliver malware. So what they'd do is, they'd send these oversized LNK files to their targets. When someone clicked on one of these files, it would kick off a whole chain of events. First, it would run PowerShell. PowerShell is a powerful tool built into Windows that can do all sorts of system-level stuff. This PowerShell script would then extract two things: a decoy document to make the victim think everything was normal, and a BAT script. The BAT script, which is another type of program, would then run PowerShell again, this time to download the real payload from OneDrive. The payload that was downloaded would be decoded using something called exclusive or encryption, and then injected into PowerShell. Finally, some shellcode, which is like raw computer instructions, would decode the actual malware, which goes by the nefarious name Rockrat, using a special 4-byte key, and then run it. Rockrat is something I'll show you very shortly, so stay tuned. The attack chain is like a Russian nesting doll. Each step reveals another. But this wasn't just a one-off thing. ScarCruft was using this method to target individuals and organizations in South Korea. And they weren't putting all their eggs in one basket either. They kept using their old macro-based Word document attacks too, just in case some systems weren't updated. Hacking groups like ScarCruft are always adapting, always finding new ways to get into systems. Just remember that. Anyway, this is just the beginning of our story. I'll show you what other tricks ScarCruft has up their sleeve. Later in 2022, in October, things started getting really dark, both in the physical world and within the internet. There was this terrible tragedy that happened in Seoul, South Korea. It was Halloween night in the Itaewon district, a place known for its wild parties. But that night, something went horribly wrong. There was a crowd crush, too many people in too small a space, and it led to multiple deaths. It was all over the news. People were shocked. The whole country was in mourning. But while everyone's reeling from this tragedy, these North Korean hackers decide to use it as bait. Yeah, you heard that right. They started exploiting people's grief and curiosity about this awful event to spread malware. Let me break down how they did it, because it's pretty technical, but also pretty clever in a really evil way. First, they created a malicious Word document. This document had some information about the Itaewon incident, something that would make people want to open it. But hidden inside this document was a nasty surprise, a zero-day exploit. Now, a zero-day exploit is like finding a secret door in a house that nobody knows about, not even the people who built the house. In this case, the house was Internet Explorer's JScript 9 engine. Yeah, I know. Who still uses Internet Explorer, right? Microsoft ended support for it on June 15th, 2022. But the thing was that even if you're not actively using Internet Explorer, parts of it are still hanging around in your Windows system. So when someone opened this Word document, it triggered a chain of events. The document had some HTML content in it. Normally, that's no big deal. But when Office tried to render this HTML content, it used Internet Explorer to do it. That's just how Office is set up. This activated the JScript 9 engine, which had this vulnerability that nobody knew about yet. The exploit took advantage of this vulnerability to run more shell code. Once that shell code was running, it did all sorts of bad stuff. In this case, it cleared the IE cache and history, basically covering its tracks, and then downloaded more malware. The scary part? We don't know exactly what malware it downloaded. The cybersecurity researchers who discovered this attack think it might have been one of three things: Rockrat, Blue Light, or Dolphin. These are all serious pieces of malware used by North Korean hackers that can steal data, take control of your computer, you name it. What makes this attack so nasty is how it combines technical sophistication with social engineering. They're not just exploiting a computer vulnerability, they're exploiting human vulnerability, our natural curiosity and our desire to understand tragic events. This whole thing was discovered by Google's Threat Analysis Group, or TAG. They said that the vulnerability they exploited was CVE 2022-41128. Microsoft patched it pretty quickly once they found out about it, but who knows how long these hackers were using it before it was discovered. So, yeah, it's not just technically advanced, it's also psychologically manipulative. And it shows just how far these state-sponsored hacking groups are willing to go to win. Now, after a couple of years, these hackers were laying low, but in October 2024, just very recently from the time of this upload, and the North Korean hackers are at it again, but this time, they're back with vengeance. StarCruft have come up with this new piece of malware. It's called Veil Shell. This thing is what we call a backdoor and a remote access Trojan, or RAT for short. Similar to Rockrat we talked about earlier. But this time, they're not just targeting their usual suspects in South Korea. This time, they're going after Cambodia and other countries in Southeast Asia. They're expanding their playground, trying to see how far they can reach. The North Korean hackers are sending spear phishing emails, carefully crafted messages that look legit, tailored carefully to each of their targets. Attached to these emails are zip files, and inside those zip files are LNK files. These guys love their LNK files. It's that same type of file we saw them using in previous attacks. Now, for this attack chain, if you click on that LNK file, it triggers PowerShell. While PowerShell is running, a decoy document pops up. This is to distract you, make you think everything's normal. But in the background, it's writing two files to your Windows startup folder. A malicious DLL file called domainmanager.dll and a config file called d.exe.config. It also copies a legitimate Windows file called dfsvc.exe and renames it to d.exe. The technical part is how it then uses something called the apt domain manager injection. This is a lesser-known technique that allows the malware to run every time your computer starts up. What makes this veil shell malware so dangerous is what it can do once it's on your system. It can gather files, compress them, and upload them to a command and control server. It can download new files, rename or delete existing ones, and even extract zip archives. Basically, it gives the attackers full control over your files. The really sneaky part about this malware is that it's based on a legitimate tool that's part of Windows. This makes it harder for antivirus software to detect. It's what we call living off the land in cybersecurity, using tools that are already on the system to avoid detection. This is a new, sophisticated method of bypassing security measures, and it goes to show how elite their team really is. But StarCraft wasn't done yet. They discovered another zero-day vulnerability in Windows. In this case, it was in the Windows scripting engine. This vulnerability, officially named CVE 2024-38178, is pretty serious. It's got a CVSS score of 7.5, which is pretty bad in cybersecurity. It's not the worst, but it's up there. It's classified as a memory corruption bug, which means it messes with how the computer handles its memory. Have you ever turned on Internet Explorer mode in the Microsoft Edge browser? You might have done this to try to fix an issue with a website, like some compatibility issues, or for any system admins, cybersecurity analysts, or even help desk people. You probably did it to try to diagnose an IT issue. Well, if you have, you might want to rethink your choices, because this vulnerability is all about running malicious code through Edge browser's Internet Explorer mode. The way they delivered it was through a malvertising campaign. Basically, they've compromised these ads for something called a toast program. Not actual toast, but some kind of software that a lot of people use. When you see one of these ads, boom, you're infected. The technical details of this attack are pretty wild. There's this thing called the JavaScript engine in Internet Explorer, specifically a file called jscript9.dll. The vulnerability causes this engine to misinterpret data types, leading to what we call a type confusion error. It's like if you told a chef that a tomato was a fruit, and they put it in a fruit salad. It messes everything up. Once they exploited this vulnerability, they delivered their infamous virus, RockRat. This whole operation was discovered and named by OnLab Security Intelligence Center and the National Cybersecurity Center of South Korea. They're calling it Operation Code on Toast, which, I gotta say, is a pretty cool name for such a serious threat. What makes this attack so dangerous is how sneaky it is. You don't have to download anything or click on a suspicious link. Just browsing the web and seeing the wrong ad could infect your computer. It's a reminder of how vulnerable we are, and how nation-state hackers are constantly finding new ways to exploit computer systems, especially in something like Internet Explorer mode. Let's take a closer look at RockRat, the crown jewel of North Korea's cyber arsenal. It's the main computer virus, the remote access Trojan I've been talking about. You want to know what makes RockRat so sneaky? Well, for starters, it's incredibly sneaky in how it communicates. Instead of using obvious suspicious servers that might raise red flags, RockRat piggybacks on legitimate cloud services. We're talking Dropbox, Google Cloud, pCloud, and Yandex Cloud. This is brilliant, because it makes the malware's traffic blend in with normal, everyday internet usage. Your average security system isn't going to bat an eye at someone accessing their Dropbox, right? So what does RockRat actually do? It performs file enumeration. Basically, it can dig through your computer, looking for specific files or types of files. This is like a burglar going through your house, but instead of just grabbing everything, they're looking for specific valuables. RockRat can kill any process running on your computer. This is particularly nasty because it could potentially shut down your antivirus or other security software. It can receive and execute commands from a remote server. This essentially gives the attackers full control over your machine. And here's where it gets really invasive. RockRat can steal data from various applications. We're talking about popular messaging apps like KakaoTalk and WeChat, and even browsers like Chrome, Edge, Opera, Naver Whales, and Firefox. It's like someone reading all your messages and browsing history. But the real technical marvel is how RockRat communicates with its command and control servers. The developers have implemented a multi-layer encryption process that's seriously impressive. First, it takes the data it wants to send and performs an exclusive OR operation, or better known as a XOR operation, on it. XOR is a simple but effective way to scramble data. It uses a random 4-byte key for this, which adds an extra layer of complexity. Then it takes this XOR data and encrypts it again using AES-CBC. AES is a very strong encryption method used by governments and banks. The CBC part refers to cipher blockchaining, which makes the encryption even harder to crack. Finally, it encrypts the AES key itself using RSA encryption with a hard-coded public key. RSA is an asymmetric encryption method, which means you need a different key to decrypt than you used to encrypt. This triple-layer encryption makes it extremely difficult for security researchers to intercept and understand the communication between RockRat and its controllers. RockRat's command structure is also fascinating. It uses single-character identifiers for different commands. Here are some examples. 0 means stop collecting data. 1 or 2 tells it to download and run shellcode from a specified URL. C instructs it to search for specific files and upload them to the command server. E allows the attackers to run any command they want on the infected system. I gathers information about the victim and sends it back to the attackers. There's even a hard-coded 4-byte value, shown here, used for XOR key derivation in the command and control communication. The capabilities of RockRat are truly terrifying. This level of sophistication in RockRat demonstrates the significant resources and expertise that North Korea is pouring into its cyber operations. It's not just about creating malware. It's about creating malware that can evade detection, persist on systems, and exfiltrate valuable data without raising alarms. We've seen some of North Korea's hacking operations, but I want you to zoom out a little now and look at the big picture. I'll help you. I'm going to pull back the curtain on their massive state-run cyber espionage machine. At the center of it all is the Reconnaissance General Bureau, or RGB. This is North Korea's primary foreign intelligence service. These guys are responsible for gathering intel and running secret operations all over the world. And get this, they've got 6 different bureaus. 6! Obviously, this stuff is very important to them. Now, when it comes to cyber operations, 2 of these bureaus are the real heavyweights. You've got the 3rd Bureau, which handles foreign intelligence, and the 5th Bureau, which deals with inter-Korean affairs. These 2 are where most of the cyber action happens. Let's talk about the 3rd Bureau for a second. They've got this thing called Lab 110, which is basically North Korea's elite military hacking unit. You can just think of them like the Navy SEALs of the internet. Under Lab 110, you've got groups with names that sound like they're straight out of a spy movie. Temp Hermit, APT-38, and Andariel. These are what we call Advanced Persistent Threats, or APTs. They're not your average hackers. These are highly skilled, well-funded groups that can maintain long-term access to a target's systems without being detected. Then you've got the 5th Bureau, which includes a group called Kimsuki. These guys are all about gathering intelligence on geopolitical events and negotiations that might affect North Korea. They're the ones keeping tabs on what's happening in the world that might impact their country. The last player in their game, the Ministry of State Security, or MSS. Think of them as North Korea's FBI and CIA rolled into one. They're responsible for counterintelligence both at home and abroad. They've got their own hacking group called APT-37, which has been known to target foreign companies working with North Korea, as well as defectors and organizations that help them. Now, you might be wondering, why are they doing all this? Well, it boils down to three main goals: espionage, stealing money, and gathering intelligence. They're not just trying to spy on other countries. They're also looking to fill their coffers and stay ahead of the game in international politics. Their hacking groups are often given the name North Korea's sole profitable enterprise, and that's for a reason. The money they steal from cyber attacks is easily one of, if not their main source of income. They use the money they steal to fund their weapons of mass destruction, like ballistic missiles. This whole setup shows just how seriously North Korea takes its cyber operations. We're not talking about a few guys in a basement with laptops. And the scariest part of all is that it's happening right now, as we speak. As Mandiant, a big cybersecurity firm, put it, North Korea's cyber capability supports both long-standing and immediate political and national security priorities, as well as financial goals. They're playing a long game here. These cyber activities directly reflect the regime's current priorities. At present, their focus appears to be on acquiring financial resources through cryptocurrency heists, targeting media outlets, news organizations, and political entities, gathering information on foreign relations and nuclear technology. The information collected through these campaigns serves multiple purposes. It's likely used to develop internal strategies, such as finding ways to bypass sanctions and funding the country's weapons programs. This demonstrates how cyber operations are integral to North Korea's broader national objectives. This work is particularly important given the scarcity of reliable information about North Korea. Defector reports, combined with analysis of cyber operations, provide valuable insights into the country's activities and priorities. So, what's the takeaway? Stay vigilant. Keep your software updated and think twice before clicking on links or opening attachments, even if they seem to be about a current event. It might just be StarCraft on the other end, delivering malware like Rockrat into your system. Are you ready for a story that will make you think twice about how you shop? Because this attack illustrates how retail stores like Hot Topic have become a prime target for vicious cyber attacks. This is an evolving story. It's fresh off the press, but it centers on Hot Topic, a name you've probably seen in nearly every mall across America. Hot Topic has 630 stores spread across the United States, 2 massive distribution centers, and an online presence drawing nearly 10 million visitors every month. Hot Topic isn't just selling counterculture clothing and licensed merchandise. They're processing millions of customer transactions, storing countless pieces of personal data, and managing over 10,000 employees' worth of information. But you might wonder why retailers are such attractive targets for cyber criminals. Think about it. Every customer account is a potential goldmine of personal information, payment details, and shopping habits. When you're processing millions of transactions monthly, that's an irresistible target for modern hackers. Now, when we talk about automated attacks, we're not talking about the Hollywood version of hacking anymore. No single person typing furiously at a keyboard. Modern attacks, particularly credential stuffing, are super crazy. Automated hacking operations. These attacks use massive databases of stolen usernames and passwords, testing them against websites at scale. It's like having a robot trying thousands of keys and thousands of locks simultaneously. Here's what makes an account truly secure in recent times. It's not just about having a strong password anymore. Modern security is all about encryption, multi-factor authentication, and constant monitoring. But even the most robust security can be compromised if users reuse passwords across multiple sites. And that's exactly what credential stuffing attacks count on. As we delve deeper into this story, you'll see how Hot Topic found itself facing a new generation of cyber threats. Ones that would test their security infrastructure to its limits and expose vulnerabilities that nobody saw coming. What makes this attack particularly fascinating isn't just its scale, but how it represents a perfect storm of modern retail vulnerability, meeting automated cyber warfare. The first sign of trouble hit Hot Topic on February 7, 2023. What initially looked like a spike in login attempts quickly revealed itself as something far more sinister. Let me explain how bot protection actually works. Imagine a bouncer checking everyone's ID card out the front entrance. Well, it's similar, but in this context, it's looking for telltale signs of automated behavior. If there are too many attempts too quickly, patterns that no human could replicate, or connections from suspicious IP addresses, well, you're going to get stopped in your tracks. But these attackers, they were good, really good. The attackers weren't just guessing passwords, they were using valid credentials, likely purchased from previous data breaches on other sites. This is what makes modern attacks so dangerous. Hackers had one goal in mind. They were trying to get all the names, email addresses, phone numbers, birth dates, physical addresses, order histories, and even partial credit card data. Every successful login gave them access to all of this personal information. March 11th brought the second wave. Same playbook, but more sophisticated. By now, Hot Topic's security team was starting to understand the pattern. But here's the thing about automated attacks. They're relentless. They don't need breaks, they don't get tired, and they can adapt their patterns to avoid detection. The situation escalated dramatically in May. 3 separate attack waves hit between May 19th to May 21st, followed by another assault May 27th to May 28th. The attackers were testing the limits of Hot Topic's defenses, trying to find any hole they could to sneak in. The company implemented basic bot protection, but it was like putting up a chain-link fence against a flood. The attacks just kept coming. June 18th to June 21st marked the 5th wave, the longest sustained attack yet. By now, the pattern was clear. These weren't random attacks. Someone was methodically targeting Hot Topic's customer accounts, using increasingly sophisticated automation to bypass security measures. What makes this first phase of attacks particularly interesting isn't just their frequency, but their evolution. Each wave brought new techniques, new patterns, new ways of circumventing security measures. But here's what's really concerning. These 5 waves. They were just the beginning. The attackers were learning, adapting, and planning something much bigger. Just when Hot Topic thought they had their security under control, November brought a chilling reminder of their vulnerability. Notice how the attackers adapted their approach. Instead of spreading attacks across months, they concentrated their efforts into 2 intense waves. November 18th to November 19th, and then on November 25th, 2023. The timing wasn't random. These attacks came during the pre-holiday shopping season, when online traffic was at its peak, and security teams were already stretched thin. But here's what makes this phase particularly interesting. The attackers had studied the company's bot protection measures and found new ways around them. There's a crucial reason why these repeated attacks kept succeeding. See, when attackers get their hands on valid credentials, traditional security measures like bot protection can only do so much. It's like having a sophisticated alarm system, but the burglars had the keys to disarm it. This is because the automated systems were being given legitimate credentials. They just weren't being used by their rightful owners. The exposure pattern remained consistent. Names, email addresses, order histories, phone numbers, birth dates, and mailing addresses. But don't let that consistency fool you. Each successful breach added more verified credentials to the attacker's arsenal, which in turn could make their subsequent attacks more effective. Hot Topic finally took a dramatic step, implementing a mandatory password reset for all users. Now, you might think changing passwords is just basic security hygiene. But there's a deeper strategy at play here. This measure invalidates every compromised credential in the attacker's database, forcing them back to square one. The company also deployed further, more enhanced bot protection mechanisms to their platform. But was it too late? Hot Topic was about to learn a harsh lesson from modern cybersecurity. You're not just fighting against technology, you're fighting against adaptation. Every security measure you implement becomes a challenge for attackers to overcome, just another puzzle to solve. But what nobody knew at the time was that these November attacks weren't just another wave of credential stuffing. They were just the warm-up for something far more insidious that would soon take the retail store by complete surprise. On October 21st, 2024, almost a year after the credential stuffing attacks were blasting Hot Topic's network, a notorious threat actor known as Satanic had just posted something explosive on a dark web forum. They claimed to have breached Hot Topic's entire database. Now, I've seen plenty of fake claims in my time, but this one was different. Let me take you back to September 12th, 2024, when this breach actually began. An employee at Roebling, one of Hot Topic's third-party vendors, had their computer infected with what we call an info stealer. Now, this isn't your average computer virus. An info stealer is like a vacuum cleaner. It specifically targets stored passwords, cookies, and authentication tokens from your browser. It's particularly nasty because it can grab credentials even if they're saved in your password manager. The infection gave the attackers something incredibly valuable: over 240 compromised login credentials. But here's where it gets really interesting. Among these credentials were access keys to 3 critical cloud services: Snowflake, Azure, and Looker. These aren't just random applications. They're the backbone of Hot Topic's entire data infrastructure. You see, modern retail companies don't just store their data in one place. Snowflake handles massive amounts of raw data. Azure provides the computing power and storage. And Looker helps analyze all this information. Think of them as all interconnected, but each protecting different parts of the company. What made this breach particularly devastating was a critical security oversight. The Snowflake account lacked multi-factor authentication, that second layer of security we're always told to use. This single point of failure gave the attackers total control of Hot Topic's back end. The scope of what they found was staggering: 730 gigabytes of data, including 25 million credit card records. But it wasn't just Hot Topic. Sister brands, Box Lunch and Torrid, were also exposed. Remember Roebling's mission statement about helping retailers unite data across silos? Well, they succeeded. Unfortunately, this time it worked in the attacker's favor. This is why third-party security is so critical in today's interconnected world. Your security is only as strong as your weakest vendor. One compromised partner can bring down an entire retail empire. Satanic wasn't subtle about their intentions. They offered the database for sale at $20,000 while simultaneously demanding a $100,000 ransom from Hot Topic. It's a modern-day bank heist, where the threat isn't just about stealing money from the vault. It's about leveraging sensitive online information. The attackers had effectively turned Hot Topic's digital infrastructure against itself, using the very tools meant to streamline retail operations as a weapon. Now, due to this unfortunate event, we can watch the cascading consequences of just a single compromised account. As cybersecurity researchers dug deeper into the Hot Topic breach, the truth began to emerge. And it was both better and worse than initially claimed. The hackers boast of 350 million affected users. Well, not all of this data was unique. But the reality was still staggering. When we verify stolen databases, we follow a precise process. First, we analyze the data structure and format. Then, we validate sample records against known legitimate data. Finally, we quantify unique entries while checking for duplicates or fake information. This process revealed the actual numbers to worry about. There are approximately 56 million unique email addresses. Over 20 million users had their full names, phone numbers, and birthdays exposed. Another 10 million plus had their home addresses compromised. And that's not even counting the billions. Yes, billions of loyalty points. Records that were leaked. The price for this data on DarkX started dropping dramatically, from $20,000 down to just $4,000. This kind of price crash usually happens when hackers realize they can't extract their desired ransom, so they try to make quick money on the dark web instead. The other alarming discovery, which I'm sure there will be lots of questions asked to Hot Topic's security team, is that the database dump contained details on 25 million credit card numbers, which have only been lightly encrypted. When companies say data is lightly encrypted, it often means using basic encoding that can be reversed relatively easily. In the case of Hot Topic's breach, well, it might just be possible to decrypt the data, including the expiration date numbers of each credit card. The exposed data didn't just cover recent transactions, it stretched all the way back to 2011, continuing right up to October 19th, 2024. That's 13 years of customer information, a pretty big breach indeed. The scope of this breach reveals a harsh truth about digital retail. Every transaction, every loyalty point, every birthday entered into a system leaves a permanent mark somewhere. And when that footprint spans over a decade, well, suddenly the impact becomes exponentially more severe. On November 11th, 2024, the entire database was added to Have I Been Pwned, a global database of compromised credentials. You can enter in your email on this website and check if it was included in the breach. But if you really care about your online privacy, then let me show you how to check if you're affected even more securely. A cybersecurity company, Atlas Privacy, has created a specialized tool at databreach.com that uses something called data hashing. Instead of sending your actual email or phone number, it converts your information into a unique code that can be checked against the breach database. This way, you can verify if you're affected without exposing any additional personal data. Here's what you can learn from this incident. First, use unique passwords for every account. I know it's a pain, but recent surveys show that 71% of people have already started using more complex passwords. Second, enable multi-factor authentication wherever possible. Remember, this whole breach started because one cloud account lacked MFA. Finally, regularly check breach notification services. They're free, and they could save you from becoming a victim. You know, online security and privacy concerns are becoming a real big deal, and it's due to attacks like the one on Hot Topic. How can you trust entering any of your details online anymore when they'll probably just turn up on a data breach? The internet isn't as pretty as it used to be. 84% of people now regularly check their credit reports. That's a huge increase from just a few years ago. Even more interesting, 77% immediately delete suspicious texts and emails, showing that people are becoming more security conscious in their daily lives. So I want to hear from you. What do you do? Are you one of these people? What do you do differently considering a website you might have signed up for over a decade ago can come back to bite you? Remember, cybersecurity isn't about being perfect. It's about being prepared. It's pretty difficult to keep up with your digital footprint, but it's not too late to start being smarter in how you surf the web. Don't go anywhere, we've got more stories coming right up. In early 2022, while the world's attention was fixed on conventional warfare in Ukraine, a different kind of battle was quietly unfolding on the internet. I'm speaking to you from the Hacker Gallery, where we track the evolution of cyber threats. And let me just say this. What started as a series of seemingly minor disruptions would soon evolve into something far more sinister. pro-Russian hacktivist groups began probing America's water facilities, targeting operational technology. Imagine a water treatment facility as a massive industrial orchestra. The operational technology systems are like the instruments. The industrial control systems are the sheet music, and the human-machine interfaces are the conductor's baton. When working in harmony, they ensure millions of Americans can simply turn on their taps and receive clean, safe water. But here's where it gets interesting and concerning. These initial attacks weren't particularly sophisticated. The hacktivists were essentially walking through unlocked doors, exploiting misconfigured devices that were left exposed to the internet. They'd find a human-machine interface, think of it as the facility's control panel, and start messing with settings, creating what official reports described as nuisance effects. But don't let that mild terminology fool you. These weren't just pranks. What we were witnessing was something I've seen countless times in my years analyzing cyberattacks. Reconnaissance. These groups were mapping out vulnerabilities, testing responses, and laying groundwork for something bigger. You see, water infrastructure isn't just about convenience. It's about survival. A sophisticated attack on these systems could potentially affect everything from basic sanitation to fire suppression systems. When I look at the pattern of these early intrusions, it's clear these hacktivists were sending a message. We can reach into your most critical systems, and we're just getting started. The truly chilling part? Many of these facilities were running on systems that were never designed with cybersecurity in mind. I'm talking about industrial equipment that was built for reliability and longevity, not to withstand attacks from state-sponsored threat actors. As 2022 progressed, these nuisance effects began to show a pattern. The hacktivists weren't just randomly pushing buttons, they were methodically testing different aspects of these systems, learning their behaviors and identifying weak points. They were building a playbook, and what we were seeing was just the prelude to a much larger campaign. Think about that for a moment. While most of us were going about our daily lives, these groups were quietly infiltrating the very systems that keep our society functioning. And they were about to demonstrate just how vulnerable we really were. While pro-Russian hacktivists were making noise at the front door, something far more insidious had already been lurking deep in America's online infrastructure for half a decade. Let me tell you about what we in cybersecurity call an APT, an Advanced Persistent Threat. The Chinese hacking group known as TYPHOON had been silently dwelling inside critical US infrastructure networks for at least 5 years before anyone noticed. 5 years. Think about that. While facility operators were going about their daily routines, this invisible dragon was methodically gathering intelligence, stealing credentials, and positioning itself for potential future operations. Now, let me break down something fascinating about how they operated. They used what we call living off the land techniques, or LOTL, if you want to sound like a security pro at your next dinner party. Imagine a burglar who breaks into your house, but instead of bringing their own tools, they only use what's already in your kitchen drawers. That's living off the land. These hackers were using legitimate Windows tools and processes that were already present in these systems, making their activities nearly impossible to distinguish from normal operations. The technical sophistication here is mind-blowing. They weren't just exploiting one vulnerability. They were systematically targeting weaknesses in everything from Fortinet firewalls to Cisco routers. But here's what makes this story particularly disturbing. They specifically targeted smaller organizations. The ones without fancy cybersecurity teams or million-dollar security budgets. But these weren't random targets. These were facilities providing critical services to their communities. Let me give you a peek behind the curtain at their methods. Using tools like Mimikatz, think of it as a lockpick, they could extract passwords and access credentials from something called the Active Directory Database. That's basically the phone book of the network, containing information about every user and computer. Once they had these credentials, they could move through the network like ghosts, appearing as legitimate users. But it gets even more sophisticated. They used PowerShell, a legitimate Windows administration tool, to manipulate event logs, essentially erasing the footprints they left behind on these systems. They set up what we call fast reverse proxy clients for command and control, creating hidden tunnels to communicate with their systems back home. And they packed their malicious files using something called UPX to make them harder to detect. It's like they were placing digital explosives throughout our infrastructure, not necessarily to detonate them, but to have the option if they ever needed it. The scariest part? While we discovered TYPHOON's presence in some networks, we have to ask ourselves, how many other systems are they still hiding in? How many other Chinese hackers are still lurking in the shadows of Western internet infrastructure, waiting for the right moment to strike? And as we would soon discover, they weren't the only ones with their eyes on America's water systems. This cyber war was about to escalate, and no one was ready for what came next. Early 2024 marked a turning point in the cyber assault on America's water infrastructure. Pro-Russian hacktivists joined in on the fun, and they weren't playing around this time. Let me take you inside what happened at a water treatment facility in Texas, because this incident changed everything we thought we knew about these attacks. The fateful day went a little something like this. It's a normal morning at the facility when operators notice something strange. Water tanks are filling beyond their normal levels. Pumps are running way too fast. And worst of all, the alarm systems that should be screaming warnings are completely silent. What they're witnessing is a cyber attack in real time, and it's about to get worse. Let me break down exactly how these hacktivists got in, because this is where it gets technical. They exploited something called VNC, virtual network computing. Now, imagine if you could reach through your computer screen and take control of another computer somewhere else. That's basically what VNC does. It's a legitimate tool used by IT professionals for remote maintenance. But in the wrong hands, it can become a key to all of the critical infrastructure. These hackers were specifically targeting TCP port 5900. Think of it as a doorway on the internet that's supposed to be locked and guarded. Hey, listen up, because this is where I need you to pay attention. Many of these facilities were using human-machine interfaces. In this case, they were touchscreen control panels. But guess what? They were going after the ones with default passwords. Sigh. This basically means that the people working at these water facilities installed touchpad screens, but didn't change the password that comes with it, fresh out of the box. That's just like leaving your house key under your doormat, with a sign on the front door that says key is under the doormat. So, honestly, maybe the victims deserved this. It's one of the most stupid and easy ways attackers get in. What makes this even more disturbing is that many of these human-machine interfaces weren't even what they appeared to be. We discovered they were actually foreign manufactured devices that had been rebranded as American products. These legacy systems were running outdated software with known vulnerabilities. They were basically installing wide-open backdoors. So yeah, once inside, these hacktivists showed exactly what they could do. They maxed out the settings on water pumps and blower equipment. Imagine flooring the gas pedal on your car and tying it down. Not only this, but they systematically disabled alarm systems, so operators wouldn't know anything was wrong until it was too late. Then, in a move that showed just how serious they were, they changed all the administrative passwords, effectively locking out the legitimate operators from their own systems. The Texas facility experienced what officials called a minor tank overflow event. The Texas incident was a wake-up call, but it wasn't the end. As we would soon discover, these pro-Russian hacktivists were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Other state-sponsored actors were watching, learning, and preparing their own moves in this escalating game, where the stakes weren't just data. They were the fundamental systems that keep our water clean and available. Just when water facility operators thought they had their hands full with Chinese and Russian threats, another player entered the game. let me tell you about something that happened at the Municipal Water Authority of Aliquippa that changed everything we thought we knew about the scope of these attacks. You see, while everyone was focused on the pro-Russian hacktivists, Iranian state-backed actors had identified a completely different vulnerability in our water infrastructure. They were targeting something called programmable logic controllers, or PLCs. Now let me break this down for you because it's crucial to understand just how fundamental these devices are. Think of a PLC as the nervous system of an industrial facility. It's a specialized computer that controls physical processes, opening and closing valves, controlling pumps, managing chemical treatments. In this case, they were targeting Unitronic Vision Series PLCs. These aren't just any controllers, they're the backbone of many smaller water treatment facilities across America. Interesting wouldn't perfectly describe what comes next. Maybe a better word for it would be terrifying. These Iranian actors discovered that these PLCs were accessible through a specific network port, TCP port 20,256. Now, imagine if every house on your street had the same exact lock, and someone found the way to crack it. That's essentially what happened here. The breach at Aliquippa wasn't just another cyber attack. It was a wake-up call about supply chain security. You see, these PLCs are manufactured overseas, programmed with standard interfaces, and shipped all over the world. When the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CASIO, issued their warning about this breach, they weren't just talking about one isolated incident. They were warning about a systemic vulnerability in how we source and deploy critical infrastructure components. Let me paint you a picture of what this means in practical terms. In a typical water treatment facility, these PLCs control everything from water pressure to chemical mixing ratios. When the Iranian actors hijacked these controllers in Aliquippa, they weren't just gaining access to data, they were gaining direct control over physical processes that affect water safety and availability. But here's what makes this story particularly chilling. We're no longer dealing with isolated threat actors. We've got Chinese APTs maintaining long-term persistence in networks, pro-Russian hacktivists causing operational chaos, and now Iranian state-backed groups targeting the very devices that control physical processes. It's like watching different predators circling the same prey, each with their own hunting strategy. The Aliquippa incident demonstrated something that cybersecurity experts had been warning about for years: the convergence of multiple sophisticated threat actors targeting our critical infrastructure. Each group brought different capabilities, different objectives, and different attack methodologies. But they all shared one thing in common. They'd identified America's water infrastructure as a vulnerable target. My personal take on this, well, looking at the timeline of these attacks, I can't help but wonder, what happens when these different threat actors start learning from each other? What happens when they begin to combine their techniques? The storm that's brewing isn't just about individual attacks anymore. It's about the perfect storm of multiple nation-state actors converging on our most critical infrastructure. And as we would soon discover, this convergence of threats was about to manifest in ways that would force us to fundamentally rethink our approach to water system security. September 2024, Arkansas City, Kansas. What happened here would become the moment when all our worst fears about water system vulnerabilities converged into a perfect storm of digital and physical chaos. Let me paint you a picture of what happens when a water treatment facility gets hit with ransomware. Imagine you're sitting at the control station, monitoring the automated systems that keep clean water flowing to thousands of homes. Suddenly, every screen goes dark. The familiar hum of automated systems falls silent. And then, that dreaded message appears on your screen. Your entire system is encrypted, and text on the screen reads, "You have 24 hours to pay the ransom, or else." This wasn't just another cyber attack. This was the culmination of everything we'd been warning about. The facility's control systems were completely locked down. But here's where it gets really interesting. And I need you to understand this. In the world of critical infrastructure, Ransomware isn't just about data. When these systems go down, you're talking about the potential disruption of basic services that keep a city running. Now, water treatment facilities have plans in place to handle this kind of crisis. They have what we call manual fallback procedures. Basically, the ability to run critical operations by hand. But think about that for a second. In 2024, we had water treatment operators in Arkansas City having to physically operate valves and pumps that were normally controlled by computers. Pretty crazy stuff. These attacks can literally send us back to the old days. City Manager Randy Fraser confirmed the water supply remained secure. But that's only because of these manual procedures. You see, this is why I've spent years studying these systems. There's this crucial intersection between digital and physical operations that most people never think about until it fails. The response to this attack was like watching a well-rehearsed emergency protocol snap into action. First, they isolated the infected systems. Then, they implemented their emergency response protocols, bringing in both Homeland Security and FBI agents to investigate. But here's what makes this attack particularly significant. It demonstrated how the lines between different threat actors had begun to blur. We'd seen Chinese APTs maintaining long-term access, Iranian groups targeting PLCs, and Russian hacktivists causing chaos. This attack showed all the sophistication we'd expect from state-sponsored actors, but with the profit motive of criminal ransomware groups. Water treatment isn't just about keeping your tap running. It's about maintaining precise chemical balances, managing pressure systems, and ensuring water safety for an entire community. When these systems go down, you're not just dealing with an IT problem. You're potentially facing a public health crisis. The Arkansas City incident showed that our water systems weren't just vulnerable to one type of threat. They were facing a convergence of sophisticated actors, each bringing their own tactics to the table. And while the city managed to maintain water service through manual operations, the attack sent a clear message. Our most critical systems were now prime targets in an escalating digital war. This wasn't just about Arkansas City. This was a demonstration of capability, a warning shot across the bow of every water facility in America, and it raised a chilling question. Who or what will be next? The U.S. government's response to these escalating attacks marked a significant shift in how we approach critical infrastructure protection. Let me tell you about something unprecedented that happened in the aftermath of these attacks, because it shows just how serious the situation had become. The Treasury Department directly targeted the individual hacktivists. They dropped the hammer on two specific members of a hacktivist group, which goes by the name of the Cyber Army of Russia Reborn. Their names were Yulia Vladimirovna Pankratova and Denis Olegovich Degtyarenko. Now, you might be wondering, what do sanctions actually do to hackers? Think of it like this. In today's world, these sanctions don't just freeze assets. They cut these actors off from the global financial system. It's like putting up a digital wall around them. In May 2024, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and EPA Administrator Michael Regan directly warned governors about the threat to water systems. When you have top national security officials talking to state governors about water facility cybersecurity, you know we're not dealing with the small fry attacks anymore. I've spent years studying how government agencies share threat intelligence, and what happened next was fascinating. They established what we call public-private partnerships. Imagine a massive network where government intelligence agencies, private sector cybersecurity firms, and water facility operators all share information in real time. It's like having thousands of security cameras, all feeding into one central monitoring station. In September 2024, CISA issued another warning about ongoing exploitation of internet-accessible operational technology and industrial control system devices. Now, let me explain why this warning was different. They weren't just saying, hey, watch out for hackers. They were specifically pointing out that these attackers were finding new ways to exploit internet-connected industrial control systems. Think about that for a moment. Despite all the warnings, despite all the incidents, we still had critical water infrastructure systems directly accessible from the internet. It's like leaving your front door wide open and hoping nobody walks in. What makes the situation particularly challenging is something I call the infrastructure paradox. These water facilities need to be connected for efficient operation and monitoring. But every connection is a potential vulnerability. The government's response has been to create these intricate threat intelligence sharing mechanisms. Imagine an early warning system that connects every water facility in America. These sanctions, these warnings, these partnerships they're all reactive measures. The threat actors are still out there, still probing, still looking for weaknesses, and they're learning from each other. The Chinese APTs, the Russian hacktivists, the Iranian state actors. They're all watching how these attacks unfold, adapting their techniques, becoming more sophisticated. The government's response shows they finally understand the gravity of the situation. But in the age of the internet, understanding the threat and stopping it are two very different things. And as we're about to see, the measures needed to truly secure our water infrastructure will require victims to seriously rethink how they approach cybersecurity. You know what's crazy about all these sophisticated cyber attacks we've been talking about? Most of them could have been prevented with some basic security measures. I'm here looking at the forensic analysis of these breaches. And let me tell you, it was an operational mistake on the largest scale. Let's break down what actually needs to happen to secure these water facilities. First up, passwords. I know it sounds basic, but you wouldn't believe how many facilities are still using default passwords on their human-machine interfaces. That's like using password 123 to protect your entire city's water supply. The EPA is literally telling facilities to change these immediately. And they're right. Think about when you log into your bank account and they send a code to your phone. Now, imagine that level of security, but for critical infrastructure. Every person trying to access these systems should need something they know, a password, something they have, a security token, and sometimes even something they are, like biometrics. Now, let me blow your mind with something called network segmentation. Picture your water facility's network like a submarine. It should have multiple watertight compartments. If one section gets breached, you can seal it off without sinking the whole ship. That's what we're talking about here. Keeping the critical operational technology networks completely separate from the regular business networks. And most importantly, from the internet. But sometimes, operators need remote access to these systems. If you absolutely must have remote access, you need what's called a VPN, a virtual private network. But not just any VPN. We're talking about industrial-grade security with firewalls and other enterprise-level security controls. The EPA has issued this comprehensive guidance, and it's fascinating stuff. They're talking about regular penetration testing, basically hiring good guys to try to hack your systems before the bad guys do. For any of you wannabe hackers out there, this could be the perfect job for you. Get your resumes ready. They want facilities to implement continuous monitoring. Imagine having a security camera that watches every single digital move in your system. All these security measures are like playing a video game. As soon as we patch one vulnerability, these state-sponsored actors find another. That's why the concept of defense in depth is so crucial. You need multiple layers of security, each backing up the others. If someone gets past your firewall, they hit MFA. If they somehow crack that, they're stuck in a segmented network. But here's the thing about cybersecurity. It's not a destination. It's a journey. These threats are evolving every day. The Chinese APTs, Russian hacktivists, Iranian state actors, they're all watching, learning, adapting. Our defense needs to be just as dynamic. As I stand here in the hacker gallery, looking at the timeline of these attacks, one thing becomes clear to me. The basics matter. All the sophisticated security technology in the world won't help if you're still using default passwords. But get the basics right. Layer on the advanced security measures and stay vigilant. That's how we protect the systems that keep our society running. The cyber war that's currently going on in America's water infrastructure isn't over. In fact, it's probably just beginning. But now we know what we're up against. And more importantly, we know how to fight back. The question is, will we learn from these lessons before the next attack comes? Or will we be writing another story about the hackers who left millions of people around the world dehydrated and defeated? Only time will tell. For now, go and treat yourself to a nice glass of water. You never know what cyber attack could be lurking around the corner.